Chapter 313. Lightning Faction. Abyssal was startled. Arson saw his expression and couldn't help but smile. Congratulations. Although you don't have many lightning oracles, but every time a lightning item is born, it is always at least 2 stars. The destructive power of lightning magic is too great. If this is a military item, it will definitely play a great role in the war. You are flattering me. Abyssal laughed. I'll go and have a look. I heard that Harley's work is almost complete. Maybe it is his thing. Well, I'll go back too. Arson got up. Both of them went out of the castle together. Abyssal also went to his own carriage after Arson left. They went to the Temple of Review. Dean ordered Sergei and Gwyneth to continue smelting the tungsten steel after he returned to the castle. This time they didn't cast a cage but 10 meters long spears. The tip of the spear was attached with shark fin barbs. Each spear had a hole in the back and was tied with a thick tungsten steel chain. Each chain was more than 150 meters long. Each spear weighed more than 1,000 kilograms, including the chain. When the first shark spear appeared, Sergei, Gwyneth, Jean, Nicholas, and the others were shocked to see it. The tungsten steel spear was heavy and sharp. It was just quietly placed in the open space next to the furnace, but made people feel a chill down their spines. It seemed that even the air around them was a lot colder. Are you going to use this to hunt? Sergei was shocked as he looked at the teenager who was standing next to the furnace. What kind of hunter's mind was that he could come up with such a terrible weapon? Dean continued to carve the model in his hand. He didn't reply as it was necessary to maintain a sense of mystery as the leader. The main purpose of a shark lance was to hunt the Great Splitter and other giant monsters in the future. It wasn't his original creation, but he had learned it from the super chip. In the Middle Ages, some fishermen would go to the sea to hunt great white sharks, whales, and other giant sea beasts. However, the size of the shark lance wasn't as strong as this one. It wasn't made of tungsten steel, and the ropes were linen ropes. Sergei and the others were amazed for a moment, but continued to work. Soon the remaining 7,000 kilograms of tungsten steel were used up. Dean contacted the Temple of Elements and bought another batch of tungsten steel. But this time he didn't look for Ellen, but another person. Although looking for Ellen would save him time, but he didn't understand Ellen's life circle. Moreover, he didn't have time to understand her life circle. If it was spread out, it would inevitably attract the attention of other consortiums. The production of the shark spear continued in the afternoon until the evening. After Dean finished carving the mold, the rest of the smelting work was handed over to Sergei, Gwyneth, Nicholas, and others. Although they didn't have much experience, but the skills involved in this matter weren't that high. They could basically master it after teaching them once. Dean went back to his room and took out a few rolls of snow paper. This was the paper with the highest level of craftsmanship. It was used by nobles. He spread out the snow paper and poured the ink into the quill pen. He pondered for a moment and then began to carve the design drawings. If other architects saw this, they would be very surprised because Dean's pen was very stable. Whether it was straight lines or curved lines, he drew them more accurately than a ruler. Even Gwyneth and Sergei would be surprised if they saw this. Such fine control of power was something that even veteran hunters couldn't achieve. Dean was used to it. The flexibility of his right hand was inseparable from the exercise of his left hand. It was also inseparable from his daily self-training in prison. Most people who entered a prison like the Thornflower prison would abandon themselves to despair. But Dean had been thinking about various hunting techniques and exercising his body's flexibility in addition to digging holes. He firmly believed that one day he would be able to get out of there. It turned out that persistence was an advantage at some point. Whoosh! The outline of fine structure gradually appeared as the quill pen drew on the snow paper. The shape was strange. Only Dean knew that the things written on the paper would completely change the world and the entire temple. And this was the first step on the road of conquest. A few hours later, the few sheets of paper were completely filled with drawings. There were no traces of any alterations, as if they had been made by nature. The meticulous structure, the specific functions of each part, and the purpose of the entire work were all written on the design paper. The picture was harmonious and pleasing to the eye. Dean put away the pen and spread out a few pieces of paper. He waited for them to dry before rolling them up and putting them into a silk bag. Then he put them into his dark box. Dean came to the windowsill and looked at the training ground behind the castle. Sergei and the others were smelting tungsten steel. He saw that they weren't lazy, so he took out the wood carving and continued to carve with his left hand. Although he had been practicing for a long time, but he felt that there wasn't a significant effect on his left hand. But the improvement of his right hand was very obvious. However, Dean didn't lack patience. The next day, Dean found another person and bought a batch of tungsten steel materials. This time he didn't refine shark spear, but cannon crossbow. Such a heavy shark spear couldn't be thrown to kill the enemy. Only a cannon crossbow could accurately shoot into the target's body. The structure of the cannon crossbow was similar to that of cannon. The key point was the tension rope. It was a kind of synthetic rope made of monster materials. It was not a pure fiber. It was generally used by the army in the border fortress. However, the shape of the arrow was more traditional. It could only be used to hunt barbarians. Often a crossbow arrow could penetrate the chest of 7 or 8 people and nail them to the ground. The strength of the arrow was so great that it could be seen that it was terrifying. However, the crossbow shaft was made of wood while Dean's was made of tungsten steel. There was a huge difference in the weight. Therefore, the requirements for the rope were extremely high. Duddian engraved the mold after the materials were transported back. He used eagle tendon rope to make a crossbow. Sergei, Gwyneth, Nicholas, and others held their breath as they went to the hillside behind the castle to test it out. Whoosh! The tungsten steel shark spear jumped out when the rope popped out. The chain behind the spear rattled as it flew for hundreds of meters. Its momentum was greatly reduced as it slid down and pierced the ground. It penetrated 4 or 5 meters deep. Chapter 3:14. When Sergei and the others saw this, the look of expectation on their faces faded as they shook their heads and sighed. Nicholas said, "The weight of the spear is still too heavy. It doesn't have enough elasticity. It can only shoot 100 meters away. If it is used to hunt big guys, it would be difficult to hit the target. Moreover, the distance is too close and the shooter is in danger." Sergei nodded. Yes. Dean was lost in thought as he looked at the shark spear. Although he had expected the elasticity to be a problem, he still had to try. There were only 2 solutions. The first one was to reduce the weight of the spear and replace the material. The second one was to increase the elasticity of the crossbow. The lethality would be reduced a lot if he chose the first option. Although there were many materials to choose from, but the lethality would be reduced. Even if the target was hit, the effect would be greatly reduced. As for the second option, the eagle tendon rope was the best rope at present. It had reached the limit of elasticity. Dean looked up and asked Sergei, Gwyneth, and others to put away the things. He needed more time to think about it. Back to the castle, Duddian asked Nicholas to serve breakfast. He read today's newspaper while eating. He mainly wanted to see the movements of the temple and the Melon family. The youngest epic metal winner in history. The creator of the legendary new textile machine and the 4-star military crossbow. Mr. Dean's new invention has been born. It is reported that the new invention isn't a wood one, but an extremely rare lightning one. Dean looked at the front page of the temple's newspaper. He saw that his news had occupied the front page. In the past, almost all the news that made the headlines were about masters. However, he had occupied the front page as an intermediate architect. This point surprised many people. Dean's status would increase by a few notches. Dean had expected that the news of the new invention would leak out, but he didn't expect that it would attract so much attention. He was surprised, but he was relieved after thinking about it. He had made 2 inventions in advance. The lowest one was the military crossbow, and the new textile machine was a legendary item. It was the key to an era. There was no need to say more about its value. His third invention had attracted more attention than the second one. If the third invention was identified as a 2-star or 3-star item, then his reputation was bound to enter a buffering stage. If the following inventions were only 2-star or 3-star level, then it would be difficult for him to get into the headlines of the temple. The myth of genius would be shattered and gradually fade away from people's eyes. Dean put down a newspaper and gently rubbed his fingers. He flipped to another newspaper. This was the newspaper of the Melon Consortium. It was about the various industries under the Melon Consortium. For the vast majority of ordinary people, they naturally didn't know that the Melon Consortium was behind these industries. Therefore, the propaganda power and influence of this newspaper had been greatly enhanced. According to the staff of the Temple of Elements, the genius Dean rarely went to the temple recently. The success rate of a new lightning invention is very low. The road of genius will die on the road of pride. According to the newspaper interview, the leading singer of the Moulin Rouge accompanied Dean to watch the song and dance yesterday. Dean flipped to the second page and saw the news about himself. He slowly glanced at it and put away the newspaper. Ina, who was the head of the Moulin Rouge, was probably just an unknown singer who had been invited by the Melon Consortium. One wanted to discredit him, and the other wanted to become famous, so they hit it off. Although he expected that the Melon Consortium would make a move, but he didn't think that it would be so despicable. Many things were nonsense and completely baseless. But he couldn't fight back. If he sued the newspaper, then the responsibility would be shifted to the singer. If he sued the singer, then his image would be entangled with the singer. In short, no matter how he fought back, he would be defeated. This was the means of the Melon Consortium to smear his reputation. Most of the common people were happy to see this kind of thing, and it became the best topic of conversation after eating and drinking. Moreover, most of the people believed in evil and doubted the good, so the only way for this matter to stick to him was to rely on his own works to speak. A group of rats. Dean's eyes slightly narrowed, although he was calm and rational enough, but he was still a teenager. It was inevitable that his heart was burning with killing intent. Dean put away the newspaper and finished his breakfast. He went to the training ground and touched the firing crossbow. He was lost in thought. Temple of Elements. Castle. Abyssal was standing in an empty room. He was looking at the metal tower in front of him. He was holding the design drawings in his hand. He carefully observed the parts and theoretical ideas in the drawings. From time to time, he would look at the things in front of him. His brows were wrinkled. After a moment, he turned to the second design drawing and continued to browse. He was startled when he saw a metal structure that looked like a base. This. He gently blinked as he carefully looked at it. Can it be like this? No one answered his words in the empty room. The temple's attendant stood respectfully on the side and didn't move. Abyssal quickly flipped through the design manuscript. After a moment, he turned back and asked the waiter, "Who made this invention?" "I'm sorry, Master Abyssal. This is confidential," the attendant respectfully replied. Abyssal was startled. He couldn't wait to pat his head. He put away the design drawings and said, "Today is cloudy. It should rain tomorrow. We will wait for the thunder to test the effect. If it is successful," his eyelids slightly twitched as he thought of this. If the design drawings were true, then the value of this thing would be too great. It should be noted that there were many lightning bolts during the rainy season and the black snow season. Many residents, including nobles, would be struck by lightning bolts. It was a small matter if the houses were damaged, but it would be terrible if people were crushed to death. Moreover, as far as he knew, the number of people who died from natural lightning bolts was at least a third of those who died from radiation. This was an extremely terrifying number. "Yes," the attendant respectfully replied as he heard Abyssal's words. Abyssal put down the design drawings and turned to leave the empty room. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. Chapter 3:15. July 29th. The weather was gloomy. Dark clouds covered the sky over the giant wall. The turbid light was covered by the dark clouds. The air was a bit cold. The pedestrians on the street had put on the thick winter clothes of the black snow season and wrapped themselves tightly. In the commercial district, the residential district, the huge square of the slums, and in front of the temple of the Holy Church, there were already staff of the Holy Church building the altar. 2 days later, at the beginning of August, which was the first day of the black snow season, would be the routine prayer day. It was extremely grand. Whether civilians or nobles, they would pray to the great God of light at home or under the altar with the priests of the temple. asking for blessings so that the people would not suffer. On the top of a towering divine castle on Mount Daga, several divine emissaries were busy building a giant steeple to the highest point of the divine castle. The cold wind blew their magic robes and messy their hair. Hurry up! Hurry up! Bury the wire first. A spirited old man commanded from the side. It was Abyssal. Several architects moved swiftly as they pulled the wire down the groove on the ground. Old E, do you think this thing will work? Another short, skinny elder asked casually. Abyssal shook his head. It's hard to say. We will know when the lightning comes. In any case, this thing has put forward many concepts of lightning faction. Even if it doesn't succeed, it can barely be classified as a 3-star item. That's good. The short old man nodded. This man should have a deep understanding of the power of lightning. He knows how to use the latest plastic material as an insulator. Perhaps it is the work of Bello. He's been studying lightning for decades. Now it's time for him to be promoted to master. Abyssal faintly smiled but didn't answer. Bello was a friend of the short old man. Naturally, he was favored by the latter. But in Abyssal's opinion, there were no less than 3 people who had the talent to make this thing. The only thing that made him regret was that he had asked his students 2 days ago, but they weren't the ones who made this thing. Otherwise, he would be proud of himself. Rumble. At this time, a muffled sound of thunder echoed in the sky. Abyssal and the short old man were startled. Their eyes lit up as they said, "Get ready. Everyone retreat." The architects who were busy in front of the steeple quickly finished the final work. They quickly retreated and followed Abyssal and the short old man to leave the place. They went to another high-rise building next to it. Abyssal and the short old man wore binoculars that were covered with plastic protection. They looked up at the gloomy clouds. A heavy rain was imminent. At this time, a staff member of the Divine Hall brought a few large umbrellas for them to use when it rained. Abyssal looked back and was shocked. "Take that thing away." "Do you want to kill us?" The architects also noticed the mistake of the young staff member. The latter was at a loss and nervous. They rushed forward and snatched the umbrellas from his hands. They threw it in the corridor behind them. The umbrellas were made of metal. It was easy to attract lightning. One of the architects shouted, "Bastard, are you blind? You dare to let us hold the umbrellas here? Get some raincoats." The young staff immediately realized his mistake. He was so scared that his face turned pale. His legs trembled as he answered in a trembling voice and hurriedly turned around and ran away. After a moment, Abyssal and others put on raincoats as they stood on the floor. Rumble. Thunder and lightning swam in the dark clouds. Electric snakes tore through the sky and lit up the gloomy world. It was as if it was daytime in an instant. The short old man whispered as he stared at the steeple giant. "You have arranged the iron to attract lightning. When the lightning comes down, it will definitely hit." Abyssal squinted his eyes as he looked at the steeple giant. Boom! The sound of thunder suddenly echoed. The pressure in the air decreased as the humidity gradually increased. After 7 or 8 minutes, Abyssal felt cold in his nose. It was a drop of rain. He looked up at the sky and immediately put on his rain hat as he waited quietly. Boom! A thick purple lightning crossed the sky. It seemed as if a flood dragon was leaping. The purple lightning split from the middle and fell on the metal pole on top of the steeple giant along with the drizzle. The bright purple lightning twisted 10 meters away from them. It seemed as if the steeple giant was the hand of a god. It caught the lightning snake from the clouds and held it in its hand. Abyssal and others' pupils shrank. They felt a slight numbness on their skin and scalp. Their whole body was aroused with goosebumps. Their blood couldn't help but speed up. They were shocked by the magnificent scene in front of them, but they were also stimulated by the electrostatic field attached to the lightning. The lightning stayed on the retinas for less than 2 seconds. Then it gradually disappeared. The steeple giant was still intact. Abyssal and the short old man raised their binoculars to look at the steeple giant. They found that there was no trace of damage on the ground. They couldn't help but jump. They knew that the invention was successful. Boom! Another bolt of lightning struck down, hitting the giant's spire and wrapping around the metal pole. When the lightning disappeared, The ground was still and scathed. At this time, the rain was getting heavier and the lightning was getting fiercer. Rumble. The lightning was pulled down from the sky and hit the steeple giant. Ordinary lightning rods naturally couldn't have such a high rate of lightning. But in order to verify the effect of the lightning rod, Abyssal arranged a lot of iron around the lightning rod. It greatly increased the probability of lightning falling. At the same time, because of the giant wall, it had some influence on the climate. The height of the clouds was generally lower than outside the giant wall. This was one of the reasons why lightning was one of the main disasters inside the giant wall. The lightning rod was unscathed in the continuous lightning strikes. Abyssal and the others watched the scene of lightning flashing more than 10 meters away. They were shocked at the beginning, but gradually intoxicated by the magnificence of the lightning. It was like watching a great art exhibition. The rain lasted for more than 3 hours. Abyssal, the short old man, and others stood in the rain for more than 3 hours. Even if they were the highest master of opera or music, they wouldn't be able to stand in the rain for more than 3 hours. In the castle, the oil lamp on the wall burned quietly, and a fragrant light warmed the entire hall. All the windows were closed, and the rain gently fell outside the window. Two maids stood quietly together, and it was obvious that their legs were a little sore from standing, but they still quietly persevered. Sergei, Gwyneth, Jean, and others were sitting on the sofa. They were eating the newly bought fruits. Dudian stood in front of a window. He gently opened the window and looked at the crystal-clear rain. Although it looked clean and bright, but he could see that the water was light black. Naturally, it wasn't because the ground was too dirty. "Master, are you cold?" Nicholas came forward and asked in a respectful tone. Dudian didn't look back. "Come here." Nicholas was startled, but still took a small step forward. Dudian asked, "What do you see?" Nicotine was taken aback. He looked out of the window and asked doubtfully, "Rain? Where does the rain come from?" "Of course it comes from the dark clouds." "Where does the dark clouds come from?" This slave doesn't know." Dudian was silent. He seemed to be lost as he whispered, "Have you ever thought about the meaning of human life?" Nicholas was slightly startled. His eyes flashed as he said, "This servant does not understand such a philosophical question. I only know that my purpose here is to serve you well. Although I have offended you many times in the past, and my heart is rebellious, but now that I am old, I do not want to struggle anymore. I hope Master can trust me once more." Dudian retracted his eyes and looked at Nicholas. Nicholas's eyes were calm and full of sincerity. Dudian raised his hand and patted Nicholas's shoulder. "Prepare a carriage for me. I'm going to the Ryan family." "Yes," Nicholas replied in a respectful tone. Sergei and others heard that Dudian was going to go out. Jean said, "I'll go with you." "No need," Sergei casually said as he peeled a fruit. "You have been going to the Ryan family every night for the past few days. Have you taken a fancy to a lady of the Ryan family?" Dudian glanced at him but didn't say anything. He waited for Nicholas to prepare the carriage. He put on a raincoat and got into the carriage. Dudian took the carriage to a butcher's shop in a remote town. Dudian spent 2 silver coins to buy an iron-backed pig that weighed 200 pounds. It was a high-grade type of pig. The meat quality was close to that of beef. Like last time, Dudian asked the butcher to slaughter the iron-backed pig and put into the carriage. Then he drove the carriage to the suburbs. He left the carriage in a small-town hotel near the fortress. He asked the proprietress to clean the carriage and take good care of it. He dragged the iron-backed boar that he had tossed into the bushes outside the town and left quickly under the cover of the night. After a while, he arrived at a remote place in the stronghold. As he had expected, the patrols were relatively loose on rainy days. Moreover, this stronghold was remote, and the barbarians had never attacked this place before. As a result, the number of guards here was not bad. Dean carried the iron-backed pig on his back and quickly climbed over the fortress. The weight of 200 pounds was like a weapon to him. It was not heavy at all. After sneaking across the fortress, he immediately flew away in the darkness. After a moment, Dean came to the place where Splitter was kept. He went into the desolate building and opened the hole covered by the branches on the ground. He carried the iron-backed pig and jumped into the basement. He saw Splitter sleeping soundly in the cage. The moment he landed on the ground, Splitter heard movement. It raised its head and saw Dudian. It squeaked a few times as it saw Dudian. It seemed to be excited as it rubbed the cage with its scythe arms. Dudian pulled out the dagger and cut off the iron-backed pig's trotters. He threw them into the gap of the tungsten steel cage. The scythe arms of Splitter swarmed up and cut the trotters into 7 or 8 pieces. It picked them up from the ground and ate them. The dagger in Dudian's hand was used to kill monsters. It was easy to cut the iron-backed pig's body and threw it into the cage to feed Splitter. In just a few days, the color of Splitter's carapace was slightly darker than before, but there was still a layer of color that hadn't faded. It looked like the paint was applied unevenly. Dudian had seen the previous Splitter that he had killed. The color of the whole body had changed to a very dark color in just 5 days. The carapace and side arms looked very strong and hard, but Splitter was a bit miserable. It had been 4 days, but it didn't grow much. The color of the carapace hadn't completely changed. The main reason was that the nutrition it ate was too poor. Little guy, be obedient. I'll kill your mother in a few days. Then we can go outside the giant wall together. I'll let you enjoy a little freedom. Dudian threw the pork to Splitter as he talked to himself. Splitter quickly ate the pork that was thrown into the cage. It was very happy and excited. After all, it was the only meal it had every day. Dudian put on a raincoat and took out a small sachet that was hanging around his neck. It was different from the other sachets. It didn't contain spices, but the blood and dried shell of Splitter. Dudian returned to the giant wall after leaving the basement. After several back and forth, Dudian was familiar with the route. Half an hour later, he bypassed a desolate mountain range. Suddenly, he saw a shadow swaying at the foot of the mountain in front of him, like a ghost. Dean was surprised. He fixed his eyes on them and couldn't help but be startled. He saw that in the drizzle, the silhouettes were connected to each other. It looked like more than a dozen people. These people were in a team, holding strange long weapons in their hands, quietly moving in one direction. Dudian's heart skipped a beat. Barbarians? He quietly pushed aside the grass and approached. He immediately saw the appearance of these people clearly. Some were tall, some were short, but their skin was dark and rough. They looked like people from remote tribes like India in the West in the old era. They had beast tooth collars around their necks, and in their hands were weapons inlaid with beast bones and wooden sticks. At their waists were fine short knives. They seemed a bit out of place. Dudian thought of the knives he had picked up last time outside the giant wall. His face slightly changed. He didn't think that the knives were really used by barbarians. He saw that the barbarians didn't have raincoats. They didn't care about the rain falling on their bodies. At the moment, the barbarians went to a steep wall that was overgrown with weeds. The barbarians at the front pushed away the weeds and went in. The rest of the barbarians went in and put the weeds back to the original position. Dudian estimated that he wouldn't have noticed the barbarians' nest if he didn't see them enter. He gently sniffed, although the rain diluted the smell, but he could still smell a mixture of human and beast. He remembered the smell and quietly left the place. Chapter 316. July 30th. It was cloudy. After yesterday's heavy rain, the air was rather humid, and the breeze was biting cold. The change in the climate indicated that the terrible black snow season was coming. The sacrificial platform in the light church and in the square had been built, and a large number of people had gathered under the platform, clustered around the statue on the platform. Although the ceremony had not officially begun, the people had already begun to pray devoutly. On the same day, at the break of dawn, in the castle of the House of Chai, the main family of the Scott Consortium, a figure secretly entered the castle from the side. 2 figures were waiting at the entrance of the passage. The figure came to a secret room in the castle and took out a secret report. The cover of the report was engraved with 9 stars. Nobles were very familiar with this symbol. It symbolized the main institution of the Holy Church, the Temple of Elements. An old man wearing a black mask in the secret room seemed to know the identity of the person who came. He quickly took the secret report and opened it. There was a short poem by a famous poet on it. He glanced at it, and his pupils suddenly shrank. His fingers holding the secret report slightly trembled. After a moment, he restrained his shock and said in a hoarse voice, "Go." The shadow who handed over the secret report didn't say anything. He just nodded and quickly turned around and left. After watching him leave, the black-masked old man put away the secret report, turned around, and entered another secret passage in the underground secret room. After passing through several corridors, he came to a basement where miscellaneous items were stored. He turned around and twisted the mechanism on the wall, closing the door of the secret basement under the miscellaneous items basement. He took off his mask and put it in his robe, walked out of the miscellaneous items basement, and came to the hall of the castle. He looked at the 60-years-old clock on the wall. It was still early. He took a light breath and slowly exhaled. His mood calmed down. He looked for the maid. "It's getting late. Get ready to work." "Yes, butler." The maid looked at the old man and replied. The sun rose, and the warm sunlight shone on the window of the castle. The young ladies and young masters of the Chai family all woke up one after another. Some of the younger third-generation descendants were curled up in their blankets, unwilling to get out of bed. At 7 o'clock, all the ladies and young masters came to the hall. Even the third generation who liked to sleep and were no exception. Because at this time, their grandfather, the head of the Chai family, Chai Rostov, would get up on time and come to the hall to enjoy breakfast with everyone. This was the way of life of the Chai family, and no one dared to disobey. However, the young masters and ladies of the Chai family were waiting in the hall for a long time. They couldn't help but feel anxious and surprised. In their memory, Chai Rostov never got up late. His life was as regular as a marionette. This could only mean that there was something more important waiting for Chai Rostov's bed, and it was usually the business of the consortium. For a time, everyone in the hall had different thoughts and guesses. Chastov's room. Looking at the secret report handed over by the old butler, Chai Rostov rubbed his eyes and took the report. He stretched out his other hand. The butler took the glasses and respectfully handed it over to Chai Rostov. After putting on his glasses, Chai slowly opened the secret report and read through it. Then, he slowly closed the report and handed it to the old butler. His facial expression didn't change much. His thick eyebrows were full of majesty and mysteriousness. It seemed like he had countless thoughts in his mind and could see through countless people's hearts. "Old master." The old butler looked at him inquiringly. Chai Rostov was silent for a moment. "This time, we must get this thing at all costs." "Yes." The butler nodded respectfully. Chai Rostov put on his shoes and got out of bed. He changed his clothes and went to the hall with the old butler. In the hall, all the ladies and young masters of the Chai family stood up in awe. After Chai Rostov sat down, everyone sat down according to their status. The old butler passed the morning newspaper to Chai Rostov. He knew that Chai Rostov liked to read the newspaper during breakfast, as it would save time and increase efficiency. The first newspaper that Chai Rostov picked up was not the newspaper of his consortium, nor the newspaper of the nobles, but the newspaper of the military. For him, he already knew what would happen to his consortium and what would be reported in tomorrow's newspaper. At his level, there were only two things that could shake the foundation of the Scott Consortium. The first was the military, and the second was the Holy Church. Currently, the war at the border was unpredictable, and it was hard to predict the situation. He could only rely on the military newspaper to understand the situation. This war was not a life-and-death battle for him. It was a business opportunity for him to make money. His famous saying was, "Where there is a struggle, there is a business." This saying had influenced many rich businessmen. It was also the principle that he used to do business. Relying on the geographical advantage of the fortress and the military magic, they are still at a disadvantage, Chai Rostov thought. These barbarians who only rely on brute force actually learn to use strategy. Interesting. On the same morning, Huashan Consortium, Melon Consortium, Krulov Consortium, and other 5 consortia received secret reports from their staff in the Temple of Elements. When they confirmed the above information, all the consortia were like silent beasts. But at the break of dawn, they started to move again. Chai Rostov woke up from his bed. The temple's newspaper had been distributed to all the castles. The silence of the morning was broken by the uproar. All the castles exclaimed in shock. There were 7 eye-catching words on the front page of the newspaper. Dean's new invention. Especially the words, lightning rod. It was the special color of the newspaper. It meant that it was an invention. The same newspaper was also sent to Dean's castle and appeared in his hands. When he saw the news on the headlines, there was a faint smile on his face. In yesterday's heavy rain, he had expected that today's results would be out, and sure enough, it would be the result. The youngest epic medal winner in history. Mr. Dean is only 16 years old. Today, his third invention has been born. After the epic-making legendary work, new textile machine, and the 4-star medium-grade military crossbow, the third invention, lightning rod, has been born. Lightning rod. Many people will be puzzled by the name. Isn't Mr. Dean a wood architect? The author thought so too. But Mr. Dean has told me what is a genius and what is extraordinary. Everyone's guess is not wrong. As the name says, this is a lightning item. Yes, it is the most destructive lightning item in the Temple of Elements. According to the identification of the temple, Master Abyssal, Master Kos, and Master Mickey, the grade of lightning rod is 4-star. Dean browsed through the newspaper. Although there were some exaggerated modifiers, it was generally good. At least he couldn't pick out any problems. What surprised him was that the grade of the lightning rod was even higher than the military crossbow. 4-star upper grade, this was already close to the work of a 5th-grade grandmaster. The military crossbow is a military item, although it plays a big role in the war, but the number of enemies it can kill is limited. Moreover, it can only be used in times of war. However, the lightning rod is a civilian item. Moreover, it can protect the lives of civilians. It can also save people's lives. The military crossbow is a kind of military weapon. In a battle, the two sides don't rely on each other's weapons, but whose weapon is the strongest? The role of the military crossbow is to dominate in mid-range combat. If there is a better weapon, then it can replace the military crossbow in this field. The military crossbow will cease production and become worthless. The only value is the combat concept that the weapon itself has. But the lightning rod is a lightning element work. It is the first time in many years that the giant wall has been able to defend against the lightning attack. It's already underestimated that it is rated as a 4-star work. If they understand the core principle of the lightning rod, the magnetic field of electricity and other aspects, it is not an exaggeration to rate it as a 5-star work. In any case, he expected the lightning rod to reach the 4-star level. After all, the Temple of Elements didn't only look at the work itself, but also the current situation, environment, and other factors to judge. Dean saw the second news in the newspaper. It turned out to be about him. One person occupied the headlines and the second page. According to the Temple statistics, Mr. Dean's accumulated points have reached the level of senior architect. From today onwards, he will be promoted to a senior architect. Dean glanced at the newspaper and almost forgot about the points. Indeed, it was enough to promote to a senior architect after producing 2 4-star works. Most architects had to produce a large number of 2-star and 3-star works to accumulate enough points to be promoted to a senior architect. It was a hard requirement of the temple. No matter how high the points were, one must have a 4-star work in order to be promoted to a senior architect. Similarly, an intermediate architect must have a 3-star work in order to be promoted to a senior architect. As for the masters of the temple, the difficulty was much higher. They must produce 2 5-star works in order to be promoted to a master. Therefore, there was a huge gap between a master and an architect. Nicholas, who was standing behind Dean, was shocked as he saw Dean reading the newspaper. Although he knew very little about the Temple of Elements, but he still remembered the experience of a primary architect from the temple. But now Dean was a senior architect. Moreover, it could be seen from a newspaper that his status was much higher than an ordinary senior architect. Churchill, the 9th castle. Abyssal held the newspaper in his hand as his complexion turned ugly. Although he could find out who the creator of the invention was, but he was too lazy to use his connections. In any case, the invention wasn't his. But he didn't think that this magnificent lightning invention turned out to be the work of this person. How is it possible? How is it possible for a 16-year-old boy to produce a top-grade 4-star item? If Dean was from a tailor's family, then he was able to produce the military crossbow, which was his talent. But what about the invention of lightning? Genius? Genius? He suddenly remembered that a long time ago, this young man came to the shrine for the first time and came here to visit him. He wanted to be his assistant and participate in a project he had produced at that time, but he refused. He did not expect that today. The latter had achieved such achievements in lightning magic and entered the ranks of senior architects. If one only looked at his resume, it should be more magnificent than any other senior architect's resume. Abyssal slightly gritted his teeth as he threw the newspaper on the table. In another divine castle, Arson was eating breakfast with a smile on his face. He was 70 years old this year. He knew that he didn't have many years left to live, so he often reminded himself to be happy every day. In fact, there were very few things that could arouse his disgust and unhappiness. He didn't care even if his inventions failed. After all, he had failed many times in his life, so he had learned to laugh at failures. He also taught his students the same way. However, when his eyes fell on the divine arts daily, the smile on his face suddenly froze. There was no trace of a smile on his face as he read the entire newspaper. His mouth twitched for a moment as he picked up his coat and left the castle. Ryan family. Old Feline looked at the newspaper in front of him. There was a smile in his eyes as he looked at Sander. You see, I know that he will never do things that he is not sure of. The Melon Consortium has to swallow back all the comments that have been released by the Melon Consortium. I reckon that tomorrow the Scott Consortium's newspaper will ridicule the Melon Consortium's news agency for accompanying singers. These defamatory words will add a touch of brilliance to his halo of glory. Even if it's just accompanying singers, he can produce 4-star top-grade items. Don't you think it's amazing? Sander laughed as he heard his father's joke. That's why the most powerful counterattack is your own strength. It's good that you understand. Old Feline smiled. Sander sighed. It's hard to imagine that a 16-year-old civilian boy would appear in a line of sight of all the nobles every day. Moreover, he has occupied the first page of the temple's newspaper. Perhaps today should be called Dudian Day. Old Feline's eyes lit up as he laughed. Yes, this is a good opportunity to build momentum. Immediately contact Huashan Consortium and other consortia. Dean is hot, and they are willing to sell him a favor. Let them write about this in tomorrow's newspaper. From now on, today will be Dean Day. Chapter 317. Prayer Day. Civilians gathered in the square where the sacrificial platform was built. The priest of the Holy Church, accompanied by 3 priests of the Holy Church, went up to the platform and began to recite prayers. Tens of thousands of words of praise poems were selected from the Holy Church's Holy Bible. The civilians had long been familiar with it. After all, every household had a copy of the Holy Bible. Every year, they would listen to the priest of the Holy Church's chanting. The ancient Chinese proverb was also applicable in this era. It was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. The people listened carefully. They clasped their hands and fingers as they prayed devoutly. Inside the castle, Dean stood in front of the window sill, looking at groups of civilians gathered in the nearby square from the distant streets of the castle. These people came from nearby towns. He knew that today his reputation had not reached the ears of ordinary civilians. Today should be the worst day of newspaper sales in the past 3 months, but among the top executives of major consortiums, his reputation should be spread. It would only take 1 day for the civilians and some nobles to know his name. In many cases, money couldn't buy fame, but fame could be converted into wealth, rights, convenience, and so on. Master, someone is looking for you. At this time, Nicholas came from behind and respectfully said. Dudian nodded. He had seen through the window that an aristocratic carriage was entering the castle. The flag on the carriage belonged to the Scott Consortium. It was obvious that the intelligence system of the Scott Consortium was far deeper and more dense than the other consortia. Dudian waved his hand to let Nicholas go out to greet him. Even a big consortium like the Scott Consortium couldn't go out to greet him personally. This wasn't arrogance, but majesty and etiquette. A moment later, Nicholas brought a young lady dressed in bright jewels into the hall. She was tall and slender, with a voluptuous figure and an extremely attractive figure. Her movements were elegant and calm, and she had the etiquette and magnanimity of a noble. Du Dian's eyes slightly moved as he saw her. "Mr. Dean, I'm Rosie. We meet again." The young woman saw the teenager sitting in the hall. There was a trace of surprise on her face. She took the initiative to come forward. Du Dian smiled and slowly got up. He waited for her to come closer. He shook her hand and said, "You are a guest. Please sit down. You're too polite to treat me as a guest." Rosie smiled and sat on a chair next to him. She looked up at the castle and enviously said, "Your castle is decorated very well. It's simple and atmospheric. I like this style the most." Dean faintly smiled. "Since you like it so much, then move in. I have plenty of rooms." Rosie was just being polite. She didn't expect Dean to be so hospitable. She responded quickly, "Well, I'll definitely come if my husband allows it. I'm afraid that my temper will give you a headache. If I interfere with your thoughts, then I won't be able to atone for my sins." Dean smiled. "Miss Wei didn't come here just to see my castle, right?" Rosie giggled. "Both. But today I'm here to congratulate you for being promoted to senior architect. As far as I know, you are the youngest senior architect of the temple in 100 years. If Tracy hadn't become a senior architect at the age of 9 more than 150 years ago, then you would be the youngest senior architect in the history of the temple. Even if you don't do anything for the rest of your life, your name will be forever engraved in the history of the temple." Dean gently nodded. Du Dian nodded. He had heard of Tracy's name. She wasn't a stranger to the people of the temple. Although 150 years had passed, but whenever they talked about the most talented person in the temple, it would be this woman. She could be described as a genuine child prodigy. At the age of 9, she had produced 2 4-star items and became a senior architect. Unfortunately, at the age of 10, she suffered from a rare disease. At that time, it was difficult to cure the disease due to the medical conditions at that time. She only had 3 months left to live when the disease was discovered. In the end, she wasn't rescued and died. Whenever this was mentioned, people would sigh with emotion. Some people even thought that if the woman didn't die, she would have become a master architect before the age of 20. "Mr. Dean, can you sell your new invention, lightning rod, to the Scott Consortium?" Rosie clenched her teeth as she looked at Dean. Dean looked at her and pretended to hesitate. Rosie's eyes lit up. "The Scott Consortium is willing to give you a 5-star price and half of the future sales of the new textile machine. What do you think? If you have any other requirements, then I promise that I will do my best to fulfill them for you. We are old friends, right?" Dean said, "I heard that your consortium and the Melon Consortium have been competing for the mineral industry. I presume that your consortium has a deep penetration into the Melon Consortium?" There was a trace of awakening in Rosie's eyes. "I almost forgot that the Melon Consortium has tried to frame you several times. Now that your reputation is high, they will be worried that you will retaliate against them. They will come up with other insidious ways to harm you. You can rest assured that with the support of the Scott Consortium, they won't be able to hurt you. But you have to guard against insidious ways. I will ask the informants in the consortium to help you pay attention to the actions of the Melon Consortium. I will inform you if there is any news." Dean nodded. "All right, we'll talk about the invention once we get the news." Rosie was startled. "Mr. Dean, what do you mean? Miss Rosie is so smart." "Do you not understand?" Dean replied. Rosie couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Dean, don't you trust me? Wouldn't we have to wait if the Melon Consortium isn't plotting against you?" "I trust you. But since we're talking about business, then naturally we will follow the rules of business." Dean faintly smiled. "Melon Consortium will take action as soon as my news comes out. I think you should be able to find out about it. This is the first deposit. I will sell the lightning rod to you after you provide 3 valid information or after the rainy season comes next year. You can rest assured that I will keep it for your consortium. I won't talk to other consortiums for the time being." Dean smiled. Rosie was startled and her face became stiff. She forced a smile and said, "Mr. Dean, lightning rod has just been released. It will definitely spread to the 3 districts tomorrow. If you sell it to us now, we will be able to produce it before the rainy season comes. In the next few months, we will also promote the roll and production process of lightning rod to maintain its popularity. If we really wait until the rainy season comes to sell it, then I'm afraid," Dean said, "it depends on the intelligence capabilities of your consortium. I believe in you." Rosie smiled. She sighed as she saw that Dean didn't mean to turn back. "Well, I hope that Mr. Dean can keep his promise and refuse to buy from other consortiums." "I will." Dudian smiled. Rosie saw his smile. She felt uneasy in her heart, but she knew that she couldn't get any guarantees from Dean. The choice was in the hands of the latter. If she angered the other, she could change to another house. After thinking for a while, she slowly relaxed and smiled. "I believe in Mr. Dean. In that case, I wish us a happy cooperation." She stretched out her slender hand. Dean shook hands. "It's a pleasure to cooperate with you." There was a trace of helpless smile on Rosie's face as they loosened their hands. "If I had known that Mr. Dean would have offered me a 4-star price, I would have directly agreed to it. Because of this matter, I'm being scolded to death by my family. It's all your fault." She looked at Dean coquettishly. Dean's heart was calm. "If you had agreed, then you would have been scolded to death by your family." Rosie couldn't help but smile, but then she sighed and said, "In the end, it's my fault for not recognizing a true talent. Mr. Dew, please don't be offended. I didn't look down on you at that time. I just didn't expect your ability to be so amazing." Dean waved his hand. "It's a trivial matter. Don't worry about it." Rosie rolled her eyes. "It's good that Mr. Dean doesn't blame me. By the way, can you pre-order your next invention to our Scott Consortium? No matter what you make, our Scott Consortium is willing to pay the price of a top 4-star invention." Dudian smiled. He thought that Scott Consortium was cunning and wanted to negotiate 2 deals at once. Moreover, Scott Consortium didn't even see the shadow of the invention, but dared to offer such a high price. Dudian knew that Dudian wouldn't deliberately produce an ordinary invention for this amount of money. After all, Dudian cared more about other people's respect for him than wealth. That is face. 4 stars is too low. Dean shook his head and refused. Rosie's eyes lit up. Last time Dean didn't even think about it and refused. It showed that Dean had a new idea in his mind and was very confident. She deliberately took a deep breath. "In that case, we will offer the same price as this time. What do you think? You're really willing to spend." Dean couldn't help but sigh. A 5-star invention was worth millions of gold coins. It was enough to support the food expenses of the slums for more than 30 years. If it was used for construction, then the slums could be built to the same level as the civilian area. However, the Scott Consortium was willing to pay such a large amount of money without even seeing the shadow of the invention. This was the wealth brought by the invention. This was the influence of the reputation of a genius. However, this amount of money could only be regarded as the upper level in the commercial district. The tilt of the wealth within the giant wall was seriously unbalanced. So any rich businessman in the commercial district could become a local tyrant in the slums. But in the slums, they could only sit back and eat. This was why the labor in the slums was so cheap. But not many rich businessmen were willing to live and develop in the slums. Even a fish in stagnant water would slowly suffocate. Not enough. Dean slowly shook his head. Too low. Rosie was startled. Not enough. Or too low. She couldn't help but look at Dean. Even with her self-cultivation and restraint, at this moment, she couldn't help but expose some of her inner thoughts on her face. 5-star is already the top. How much higher do you want? Dean naturally understood her expression. He shrugged and said, "If you want to pre-order, pay me the money now. I can consider selling it to you at 5-star price. This is the only opportunity." Rosie almost choked and spat out a mouthful of blood. 5-star high grade. Why didn't you say it was higher? This is the only opportunity? She couldn't wait to knock on the young man's head. Could it be that he had become so arrogant that he didn't even know who he was after producing 3 high-quality divine arts in a row? If it were someone else who said this, she would probably have drawn her sword. You. Rosie swallowed her words and held back her temper. She took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. She forced a smile and said, You raised the price too high. I'm scared. Please don't be offended. This price is a bit. Dean asked. Does it mean that you refuse? I'm crazy if you don't refuse. Rosie couldn't help but choke in her heart. It's not a refusal. It's just that the amount of money is too much for our consortium. It seems that you can't buy it since your consortium is so poor. Dean shrugged. I've given you the opportunity. Don't say that I didn't sell you a favor. Rosie's mouth and eyelids twitched. She couldn't control her murderous aura. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at Dean's expression. She was afraid that she would lose control of her fist. She gritted her teeth. Mr. Dean, I'll leave first. I'll inform you the first if there's news from Mellon Consortium. Take care. See off the guest. Nicholas, who was standing next to Rosie, immediately stepped forward and escorted her out of the hall. It didn't take long for Rosie to leave. Huashan Consortium's people came to the castle to visit Dean with a lot of gifts. Dean asked Nicholas to accept the expensive herbs and watches. He politely declined Huashan Consortium's offer on the grounds that he wasn't going to sell them for the time being. He didn't directly refuse them. Huashan Consortium was extremely disappointed as they didn't come to an agreement. They immediately made the same plan as Rosie. They wanted to pre-order Dean's next invention. Dean wasn't biased, as he gave the same price as Rosie. The person in charge of Huashan Consortium asked twice to confirm that there wasn't a problem with his ears. He was stunned for a moment before he smiled and declined. He bid farewell to Dean and left the castle. Chapter 3:18. 5-star price. The diplomat of the Green Consortium almost bit his tongue as he heard Dean's words. He looked at Dean in amazement. Mr. Dean, did I hear it wrong? Or are you didn't hear it wrong? There's only one chance. Do you want to buy it or not? Dean was too lazy to say more. His patience had been exhausted after receiving several consortiums. For him, it was better to learn more about the knowledge in the super chip or exercise the flexibility of his left hand than to use the time to negotiate business. The diplomat of the Green Consortium saw the impatience on Dean's face. He was dumbfounded. Mr. Dean, your price is too high. I need to go back and report to the consortium. I can't make the decision on this matter. If you can give me a reply within 2 days. Dean was too lazy to say more. He looked at Nicholas, send the guest off. Yes, master. Nicholas's attitude was respectful, but his heart was shocked. He was familiar with the names of the Green Consortium, Krulov Consortium, and other consortiums. It could be said that these consortiums controlled the entire commercial district and even the mainstream economy of the entire outer wall. They were famous supergiants in the aristocratic and wealthy circles. Countless people could enjoy the plucking of their leg hair. Even a fool could see that Dean's influence and value were terrifying. Please, he turned to the diplomat and said politely, but there was some regret in his heart. If he had known earlier, he would not have played those tricks. He would have been a prominent figure in the future if he could get Dean's trust, just like how he once stole the property of an aristocrat and became a rich businessman. But when he went to some prestigious aristocratic family, he had to be polite to the housekeeper and servants. He didn't dare to have the slightest contempt. The diplomat sighed and shook his head. He turned and left. Dean asked Nicholas to prepare the carriage after the diplomat left. He went to the Temple of Elements to receive his senior architect medal. At the same time, he exchanged some materials he needed in the temple. Scott Financial Group. Inside the conference hall, a dozen figures were sitting on both sides of the conference table. The one sitting at the head was an old man wearing a gorgeous black suit with gold embroidery. All the nobles living in the central area knew that this was the unique attire of the Chai family. This dignified and reserved old man was the head of the Chai family, Chai Rostov. He was also the biggest director of the Scott Consortium and had the final say. Are you sure? Chai stared at the woman who attacked him. It was Rosie. Rosie bitterly smiled and said, I've repeatedly confirmed it. There's no mistake. Moreover, he said that it's a friendship price. After this opportunity, he won't give it again. He's crazy. The middle-aged man on the other side of the long table widened his eyes and said angrily, 5-star high grade. And it's a friendship price? If that wasn't a friendship price, then what was? He even said that there would be no more chances after this. That's insane. This is too exaggerated. Another old man shook his head and sighed. An elegant lady next to him said in a cold voice, "If I remember correctly, he's only 16 years old, right?" A 16-year-old boy has produced 3 outstanding works of magic in a row. I do admire his talent in magic, but he has to bear such a great honor at such a young age. His adoptive parents are still living in the civilian area, and there is no one to teach him. It is inevitable that he will be emotional. What a pity. I hope that when he suffers a setback, he will not be unable to recover. Now that he has been praised to such a high level, no matter what kind of genius he is, it's inevitable that he will be buried by the secular world. Another thin, middle-aged man said. Chai listened to the voices of the crowd in silence. After a moment, he slowly said, "You go and tell him that we can only offer the price of 5 stars medium grade. High grade is impossible. If he doesn't agree, then forget it. I've already given him the chance." Rosie bitterly smiled and said, "Based on my understanding of him, he won't agree. Moreover, I have also tried, but his attitude is very resolute. He isn't deliberately proposing a high price to pull us down, but rather a fixed price." Chai Rostov's mouth slightly twitched. "Then contact our informants as soon as possible. Infiltrate into Melon Consortium and steal the information about Mr. Dean. Strive to seize the lightning rod as soon as possible. The other consortiums will get the same information. No one will agree unless they are crazy." Rostov sighed. "I know. I'll do it as soon as possible." Others looked at each other, but didn't continue to say anything. Although Rosie's attitude towards Dean was now a senior architect of the Temple of Elements, his potential was extremely high, so they didn't dare to talk too much behind his back. After all, although they were from the same consortium, but they weren't a family. They weren't as friendly as they looked on the surface. Temple of Elements. Dadian ordered the coachman to go directly to the Temple of Elements. The carriage had the flag of the Temple of Elements. He could freely enter and exit most of the places of the Temple of Elements except for the castles of other masters. Dean was relieved that no one recognized him along the way. He took off a mask and covered his face after arriving at the castle. He went into the hall of the temple and found the exchange office. He selected the items he needed from the catalog. After 7 or 8 minutes of selection, he finally selected 3 items. Although the effect was slightly worse than he expected, but it would be effective if the quantity was enough. Nowadays, his every move was being watched by countless people. There may be spies of other consortia lurking around the castle. He was too lazy to go to the Dark Church to buy these things. Although the Dark Church was far ahead of the Holy Church in the research of these things, but it was easy to expose his identity. Moreover, with the identity of a primary alchemist of the Dark Church, it would be difficult to buy so many things at once. 100 pounds of each, Dadian said to the person behind the exchange desk. There was a young man behind the exchange desk. He took the items from Dudian's hand. He was stunned as he saw the items that Dadian had selected. 100 pounds of each? 1 pound? Dadian nodded. I'll come back tomorrow to buy more. The young man was speechless. People buy these things by gram, but Dadian was buying by weight? I'm sorry, sir. These things are limited in stock. If you want to buy 100 pounds, then you need to be a master-level authority. If you're buying for your teacher, then please show your teacher's medal. The young man restrained his curses as he maintained a polite euphemism. Dadian took out his epic medal. Can this be counted? The young man was startled as he saw the medal. His pupils shrank as he said in astonishment, Epic medal? This. He suddenly thought of something and asked, Are you Mr. Dean? Dadian was startled as he lowered his voice. Don't be so loud. The youth came back to his senses and saw Dean wearing a mask. He immediately knew what Dean meant. Embarrassed, he smiled and said, Sorry, I couldn't control myself. Please don't mind me. I didn't recognize you. I'm really sorry. You're welcome. I'm in a hurry. Give me the order. Dadian said. The young man quickly handed over the exchange order. After a moment, Dudian filled in the order form and handed it to the young man. The young man looked at the order form and saw the name Dudian. He knew that he wasn't mistaken. Although Dudian's face was covered, but his voice was very young. There is only one person in the Temple of Elements who had won the epic medal at such a young age, and that was the young man in front of him. The young man carefully put away the order form and smiled. "Mr. Dean, I'll do it for you now." Dudian nodded. "Then I'll trouble you. I have other things to do. Goodbye." He waved goodbye and left. Dudian returned to his castle after leaving the Temple of Elements. He looked at the mailbox at the door and asked the temple staff who was standing next to the mailbox, "Is there a letter from Dudian?" The temple staff looked at him in surprise. "Are you Mr. Dudian? There are so many letters that the mailbox can't fit all of them. I've taken them out and put them in another box." Dudian was startled. He thought that other people would write to him in addition to the temple. After all, he was a celebrity now. He immediately asked, "Is there a letter from the temple?" The temple. The staff scratched his head. "I don't know." Dudian thought for a moment. "Give me the letters from this morning. The ones from this morning are still in the mailbox. I haven't had the time to clean them out." The temple staff quickly took out the key and opened the mailbox. There were a lot of letters inside. There were at least hundreds of letters. He picked out 2 letters and put them on the other side. He arranged the rest into a neat stack and handed it to Dean. "This is yours," the staff said enthusiastically. Dudian nodded as he picked up the stack of letters. He was about to turn around and leave when he thought of something. He took out a golden bill from his pocket and handed it to the staff. "Please send all the letters to my room." "Thank you. You are too polite." The temple staff was pleasantly surprised as he repeatedly thanked Dudian. Dudian turned around and entered the castle. He met some architects along the way. They were surprised to see Dudian holding a thick stack of letters. One of them came forward. "Are you Mr. Dudian?" Dudian felt that he urgently needed an assistant to improve his efficiency. However, it was a bit difficult to find a suitable candidate. Barton and the other 2 had been seriously infected by radiation. They were vulnerable to all kinds of eyes when they came to the temple. "It's me. I have something urgent to do. Let's meet next time." Dudian politely refused. The architect bitterly gave up the idea of chasing after Dudian. He politely said a few words and then stopped to watch Dudian leave. Dean came to his own room and was about to open the door when he met Old C, who was coming out of another room. The latter was startled as he saw Dean. He didn't expect to bump into Dean so coincidentally. He locked the door and smiled. "Congratulations. I didn't expect you to be promoted to senior architect in such a short time." "Congratulations." Dudian smiled. "I believe that you'll have a breakthrough soon. I'll be waiting for you in the senior architect's room." On the first day they moved in, the latter wanted to knock him down a peg. Now, the 2 of them lived on the same floor, but met each other indifferently. There was a glimmer of hope in Old Man's eyes as he heard Dudian's words. "I will." Dudian nodded as he pushed the door and put the letters on the ground. Old Man's eyelids twitched as he noticed the stack of letters in Dudian's hand. He said goodbye and left. Dudian rummaged through the stack of letters to find the ones sent by the temple. The newspapers had published the news that he was promoted to senior architect. The temple must have sent him a letter to notify him. He searched for a moment and finally found a letter with a golden cover. There was a symbol of 9 star cities on it. It was the official letter cover of the temple. If others were to copy the symbol without permission, then they would be prosecuted and punished by the temple. It was a big crime. At this time, the staff of the temple came with a big box of letters. He seemed to be an ordinary person as he was tired and out of breath. Dudian was surprised as he saw the box full of letters. There were at least thousands of letters in it. He smiled bitterly and asked the staff to put the box down. After the staff left, he put the box in the room and didn't care about it. He first opened the letter in his hand and glanced at it. Sure enough, it was a letter informing him of his promotion to senior oracle. Dudian immediately put away the letter. He didn't look at the other letters on the ground as he went downstairs. He went all the way to the Abyssal Castle to replace his medal. At the same time, Dudian went to the Abyssal Castle. Various consortia were discussing the purchase plan of Dudian's new invention. An urgent message was passed into the hands of the Holy Church and the highest authority of each consortium. What? Lost? Rudolph was shocked as he looked at the butler in front of him. How is it possible? We have been fighting with the barbarians for so many years, and we have never lost an entire fortress. How could they take it this time? Chapter 319. Damn, these barbarians have become so cunning. Rudolph's face was gloomy. Immediately send our informants to check the military's movements. Let's see how they choose. This time the barbarians broke into the fortress. They must have been planning for a long time. Also prepare the carriage. I'm going to the consortium for a meeting. Yes, the butler replied. In another room of the castle, there was a bedroom of hundreds of square meters. There was a large bed with a pink mosquito net. It was 5 meters long and 4 meters wide. The bed was padded with thick cotton velvet. The servants had to use a stick to make the bed. At the moment, a beautiful figure was sitting on the bed. She was using a pair of scissors to cut a card. There were 2 small figures on her feet. One was a man and the other was a woman. She was cutting a huge card in her hand. It looked like a castle building. On the other side of her hand was a law book. When she was tired, she would stop to rest and read the book. Mel family. In a luxurious office, a dark red carpet covered every corner of the room. The light golden curtains were decorated with hollow butterflies. The light from outside shone through the curtains onto the carpet. When the wind blew against the curtains, the butterflies seemed to be dancing on the carpet. All the decorations in the room exuded a sense of elegance and femininity. There used to be a portrait of a famous actress hanging on the ceiling of the room. Now it was replaced by a magnificent map. The map was square. It was the outline of the entire giant wall. The central area of the map was dark. The periphery was very small. It was sandwiched between the outer wall and the inner wall. It looked like a narrow sewage drain. There were 4 areas inside the map. In addition to the garbage dump, the other 3 areas were sequentially isolated. The drawing on the map was rather detailed. One could vaguely see the outlines of the buildings in each area, ranging from simple to prosperous. On the periphery of this area, there was an extremely small line and a black dot marking the symbol. Outside the symbol was a scarlet wasteland. Outside the wasteland was the outline of the giant wall. The 4 sides of the giant wall had a large number of color plates with small numbers written on them. Under this magnificent map sat a slender and delicate young lady. Her golden hair cascaded down her shoulders like a waterfall. Unlike the curly hair that most noble ladies liked, her hair was as straight as a pencil, and the bangs above her eyebrows were neatly cut. She was full of a capable and experienced temperament. She was dressed in dark red clothes with a black skirt on the outside. She was dressed elegantly like a lady. Her father used to sit in this position. Now she was sitting in this position. She was a young lady of the Mel family, Sarah Mel. Miss, the king's fortress has been broken. Will the military dispatch the guards to encircle it? A fair-skinned, big-eyed maid next to her asked in a low voice. She was dressed differently from ordinary maids. Her clothes were more neutral and full of heroic spirit. With her short brown hair, she looked like a slim and handsome young man at first glance. However, the bulging breasts in front of her chest betrayed her gender. Sarah Mel was sitting in a chair looking at the small map in front of her. She thoughtfully said, "If the guards are used here, then they will be able to force the barbarians to retreat. But the other fortresses will be attacked by the barbarians. The losses will be even greater. This is probably the first step of the barbarian strategy. Barbarians don't have the environment to learn knowledge. How can they be so cunning?" The maid was puzzled. Sarah Mel slowly said, "We humans are born to attack. It's just like how beasts are born to hunt. In a long battle, if they don't grow, they would have been eliminated by us long ago. This time, they dared to invade during the Day of Blessing. The strategists among these savages are far smarter than we thought. I'm afraid this will be a long and drawn-out battle. Damn soldiers, they can't even defend a fortress." The maid didn't have much fear in her face as she saw her angry face. She just said in a worried tone, "If it is a protracted war, then the losses to our consortium will be too great. The position behind the king's fortress is the Red Maple Mountains. It is the mining area of our Melon Consortium. After the barbarians capture the fortress, they are bound to occupy the Red Maple Mountains. The terrain there is dangerous. It is easy to defend, but difficult to attack. It is very likely that it will be the first stronghold of the barbarians. Our consortium will fall into a disadvantageous position in the war against the Scott Consortium. Saramel looked up at her and smiled. You didn't follow me for so long in vain. You have a good perception. The maid was startled. It's all thanks to you, Mississippi, Saramel smiled. Then I'll take this opportunity to test you. What do you think we should do now? The maid's eyes turned. Miss, you said that the mining industry is a place that our consortium must fight for. It is also the foundation of Melon Consortium's financial resources. So we can't lose the Red Maple Mountains. So we can only find a way to help the military expel the barbarians. We can temporarily rent a large number of war supplies from the military to share the burden of the war. After the war is over, we will have time to collect the debt. Even if we can't collect the debt, the military will owe us a favor. In the future, our consortium will be more convenient than other consortiums. Saramel couldn't help but smile. You little devil, this idea is good. The maid's eyes lit up. It's all thanks to you, Mississippi. Sarah took back her eyes and said, the idea is good, but it's not feasible. Other consortiums can think of this method. The military can also think of it, so the effect is not great. Moreover, you underestimate the background of the military. If the time comes, they can immediately send the Imperial Guards to expel the barbarians and plug the gap in the fortress. The maid was startled. Then, why didn't the military act? If we let the barbarians ravage, then the reputation of the military. Lisa, you have to look at the long term. Just a little bit more, and it will be enough. Saramel's finger gently tapped on the table. Each of our consortiums, including the military, have to face more than one enemy. In this world, everyone is an enemy. You have to remember this sentence. Therefore, some cards can't be exposed until the critical moment. As for reputation, the eyes of the masses can see what we want them to see. Who knows what we don't want them to see? The heroic-looking maid called Lisa was startled. She lowered her head and said, Miss, you are smart. At least I am better than my brother. Saramel's eyes flashed. He only knows how to work for the Holy Church. What is the use of being a knight of light? He is just a lackey of power. Lisa's face slightly changed. She didn't dare to say anything. Get ready. Uncle Rudolph should be impatient to hold a meeting to discuss how to solve the problem. The Red Maple Mine is the property of the Bourong family. If they lose it, then how will they be able to be on equal footing with our Mel family in the future? If it wasn't for Rudolph's short-sightedness, then the most talented architect in history, Dean, would have been a member of our consortium. At that time, our consortium would unify the economic wealth outside the giant wall. Wouldn't it be a matter of time before we unify the wealth outside the giant wall? What vulgar guy? Saramel coldly snorted. Lisa nodded again and again. She secretly looked at Saramel, but didn't say anything. Temple of Elements. Abyssal Castle. This was the place where architects who were below master level would receive orders. Dean showed his identity medal and entered the temple. He went through a series of procedures and finally received his senior architect medal. He also got an additional production fund of up to 50,000 gold coins. Although this amount of money wasn't much for him. The price of the lightning rod could reach more than 500,000 gold coins. But as a bonus, it was extremely high. In addition to the bonus, he was transferred to a new castle. There was a separate research room. He didn't have to worry about being disturbed by the people next door or upstairs or downstairs. Dean took the things back to his room. He hired a staff to pack up all the letters on the ground. He took his other tools and left the place. He met other people in the castle. They saw Dean's outfit and knew that he was ready to move out. They were envious of him. A few of them wanted to take the opportunity to build a good relationship with him. They wanted to pave the way for the future, but Dean politely refused. Dean came to the 13th castle according to the instructions. He saw a familiar figure at the door. The latter also saw him and was startled. After a long time, he squeezed out a stiff smile. I heard that you were promoted to senior architect. Congratulations. Tiffany didn't expect that she would meet the boy again so soon. The last time they had argued in the temple, she had failed. Later on, she thought that the crossbow was a blasphemy against her master's work. Not only did it surpass her proudest work, but it also surpassed her master's tri-star snake crossbow. This matter had a deep impact on her. But the most profound thing was that the boy had said, the best way to pay respect is to surpass others. For this reason, she put aside her thoughts and painstakingly studied her own divine incantation. However, when she had just entered the final stage of her divine incantation, she found that the other party had once again created a great uproar. He had produced an even more outstanding work. Moreover, it was a cross-discipline work, and he had become one of the few dual-discipline divine incantation users. Moreover, because of this work, he had reached the status of a senior oracle and was on an equal footing with her. What was even more unexpected was that the other party had actually been assigned to the same castle as her. Dean didn't expect to meet this woman here, but it was a trivial matter for him. He smiled. I didn't expect to see you here. Are we going to be neighbors in the future? Tiffany's heart relaxed as she saw Dean's relaxed smile. She didn't know how to respond if Dean was going to pursue the matter. However, it seemed that Dean didn't care about the past. Tiffany smiled. I was in the 9th castle, but now I have moved here. I didn't expect such a coincidence. If you need any help in the future, just tell me. All right. Dean smiled. Senior architects were people with a wide network. It was better to have one more friend than one more enemy. Tiffany saw the staff of the temple behind Dean holding a huge bag. You have just arrived. Which building? I'll take you there. It's all right. I'll find it myself. Don't mention it. I don't need this. Tiffany smiled. Dean didn't refuse anymore. He told Tiffany the temple's number and followed Tiffany to complete the check-in procedures. He gave the key to the previous room to the staff of the temple and asked them to hand it over to the temple. Dean casually glanced at the floors of the building after saying goodbye to Tiffany. He saw some scattered furnishings, but he was too lazy to tidy them up. For him, this was just a temporary foothold. His goal was to reach higher. Dusk. Dean saw the servant of the Ryan family standing in the hall waiting for him when he returned to the castle. The servant saw Dean and immediately came forward to greet him. Dean went out of the hall and returned to the Ryan castle with the servant. 2 hours later, Dean appeared on the 2nd floor of the Ryan castle. Sander was also present in the study room of the old patriarch. I've just heard about it. Old Feline lowered his voice. The king's fortress has been broken. I heard that it was broken this morning. The barbarians should have marched to the Red Maple Mountains behind the fortress. If the military moves fast enough, then they can stop them before they enter the Red Maple Mountains. But if they are slow, then it will be a long war. The surprise on Dean's face receded a little bit. His eyes flashed slightly. He frowned and pondered. Is the Red Maple Mountains ownerless? Or does it belong to a consortium? It's the territory of the Mellon family. Old Feline replied. Dean was startled and lost in thought. Old Feline and Sander looked at each other. They didn't make a sound as they waited for the youth. Dean looked up. How much do you know about the barbarians? Old Feline and Sander were startled. Old Feline said, Do you want to help? This isn't something we can intervene in. The barbarians are extremely fierce. They are led by military counselors. They are brave and good at fighting. Their physique is far stronger than our soldiers. Moreover, there are some crazy blood barbarians among them. They have amazing physique and are as terrifying as hunters. Moreover, their strength is greatly increased when they are enraged. They are like beasts and are extremely difficult to deal with. Dean's eyes slightly moved as he pondered. After a moment, he stood up. We will pay attention to this matter for a few days. The Mellon Consortium is bound to keep an eye on our recent actions. You don't need to do anything. I will handle it. Old Feline looked at him and nodded. I'll leave it to you. Dean nodded slightly, put on his coat, and turned to leave. Old Feline wanted to send him downstairs, but was stopped by Dean. Let Uncle Sanders send me. You should go back and rest. Old Feline's eyes saw the servants in the hall. He hesitated for a moment, but nodded. Dean told the coachman to go to a nearby hotel after leaving the Ryan family. It's too late. I won't go back to sleep tonight. I'll rest here. He opened 2 rooms, one for the coachman and the other for himself. Chapter 320. It was curfew time. Dean moved along the street at full speed. He avoided the patrolling soldiers in advance by relying on his keen hearing. It didn't take long for him to reach a small town on the outskirts. It was a rundown town. The soldiers on duty had a meager salary. They were chatting and dozing at the entrance of the town. After the curfew, they were too lazy to care about anything else. Dean came to the butcher's house, put on a mask, and still bought an ironback pig. The head of the butcher's house was a middle-aged man who had already recognized Dean. He was not surprised to see Dean dressed like this. He suspected that Dean was a thief, so he politely handed the ironback pig that had been slaughtered in advance to Dean. His youngest son did not sleep. When he came out and saw Dean, he screamed in fear and was scolded by the butcher. His wife immediately took the child to the room and closed the door. Only whispers came out. Ordinary people could not hear them, but they could not escape Dean's ears. Dean listened to his wife's words while trading. Seeing that no one was talking about him behind his back, he was relieved. He put the ironback pig into a sack with thick thread and turned to leave. The middle-aged butcher was deeply awed by the power shown by this action. He remembered Dean's warning more and more. He didn't dare to expose the trade between the two. After all, if this matter was spread out, he would also be punished by the law. Dean followed the river outside the town and left the town from the side. He didn't see any patrolling soldiers along the way. After entering the wilderness, he quickly went to the fortress where he had repeatedly sneaked into. Today was different from usual. Looking from afar, there was obviously a team of soldiers on the fortress. The smell of different people was much stronger. Dean observed for a moment, found a gap, and climbed over the wall with ease. After sneaking out of the fortress, Duty immediately went along the wilderness to the dilapidated building. Dudian saw a splitter in the tungsten steel cage as he came to the basement of the building. The latter also saw him and stood up from its sleeping position. Its side-like arms touched the tungsten steel cage. Ding, ding, ding. It sounded like countless swords were hitting against each other. Dean took out a dagger and, as usual, cut the ironback pig into several pieces and threw them to it. The little splitter looked at the ironback pig that was thrown into its stomach and happily enjoyed it. It didn't take long for the whole ironback pig to enter its stomach. After eating, it sat down and rested again. It seemed as if it knew that there wouldn't be any more food. Dean was happy to see that it didn't roar at him. He didn't carry Splitter's blood shell, so he didn't have the smell of Splitter. But the little Splitter seemed to know him. Even if he was close to the cage, it didn't arouse its fierceness. Dean smiled as he sat beside the cage and chatted with it for a while. Although he knew that it couldn't understand him, but because of this, he was able to open his heart and speak his mind without any scruples. In this bleak and cold night, in this dilapidated house on the barren mountain, a man and a beast were whispering to each other. Dean said goodbye to Splitter after half an hour. He blocked the hole outside the basement and left the broken house. He went in another direction towards the death passage that he had rented. There was a fortress in the middle of the passage to the giant wall. It was guarded by knights of the Holy Church to prevent the hunters from sneaking into the city. After all, it was difficult to rely on the military fortress to prevent the hunters from sneaking into the city, especially the hunters who had special lurking abilities. Dean stopped in front of the light fortress. He took out a high-powered telescope to observe the situation. Everything was as usual. It seemed that the destruction caused by the little Splitter was just an illusion. He hesitated for a moment and gave up the idea of taking a risk. He turned around and left. Only now did he realize how difficult it was to be alone. If he had an acquaintance in the Holy Church, all he needed to do was call, and he could sneak over. This was what other consortiums had. This was the foundation of their power. Dean went diagonally to another fortress. It was the King's fortress that had been breached by the barbarians. It took him more than an hour to reach the King's fortress. He saw some scattered barbarians along the way. They were marching towards the direction of the King's fortress. Dean didn't attack. Although he couldn't find any information about barbarians in the library and knew very little about barbarians. But he knew that the spoken language of barbarians was different from that of the fortress. It would be difficult to interrogate them. If he met a high-ranking barbarian, then the other party might know some of the living area's language and know enough about barbarians. Then he would be able to kidnap them. Dean smelled the thick smell of blood from the grassland by the time he was 10 kilometers away from the King's fortress. It was pungent and choking. It wasn't difficult to imagine how many soldiers had been sacrificed in the war. He sneaked about 8 kilometers into the fortress. He could see the outline of the fortress from afar. He saw that one of the tall walls had collapsed. A lot of hazy black figures swayed and entered the fortress through the gap. Dean's eyes lit up. He didn't expect that the military wouldn't be able to take back the fortress. Moreover, he didn't hear the sound of military drums and fighting. Did the military give up the fortress? Behind this is the plain, which leads directly to the living area of the commercial district. There are nobles and rich merchants living there. The military should be carrying out the final defense on the wall of the residential area. Once the wall is breached, the barbarians will be like wolves in a flock of sheep. The casualties will be uncountable. Dean's eyes lit up. Although the military should be able to hold on, but the barbarians couldn't be underestimated. In any case, the first people to be sacrificed were the nomadic civilians who lived on the plain. Although there were only some scattered villages and small towns, but the population was at least tens of thousands. If the military didn't counterattack, then it meant that the residents of the plain would be abandoned by the military. Dean's eyes narrowed as an idea came to his mind. He turned around and quietly left. It was early in the morning when Dean returned to the hotel. He woke up the coachman and went directly to the temple. Dean went straight to the temple and bought 100 kilograms of materials. He found another thing. How much do you need to exchange for gold coins? The person behind the counter was still the same youth. Dean was wearing a mask, but he recognized him. It will only cost 10 gold coins for 1 drop. Dean immediately said, "Give me 2 bottles." The youth was slightly stunned before he bitterly smiled. "With your authority, you can only purchase 1,000 drops at a time. That's the amount of 1 bottle." Dean frowned. "All right, I'll give you 1 bottle." The youth's mouth twitched. He knew that Dean had recently developed a new invention, so he didn't lack money. "All right, fill out the form, and I'll apply for it for you." Dean filled out the form, paid the money, and turned to leave. Dean got off the carriage and went to the 13 castles. He asked the coachman to wait for him. He was stopped by the staff of the temple. "Hello, are you Mr. Dean?" Dean nodded. "This is the invitation letter for you." The staff respectfully handed out a letter. Dean was surprised as he took the letter. There was no signature on it. He didn't open it on the spot. He took out the letter and glanced at it. It was a letter from the 13 castles. They were inviting him to participate in the symposium held in March. The date was 3 days later. The invitation letter was sent 3 days in advance. Most of them wanted to give the architects a buffer time so as not to delay the creation of the invention too suddenly. Dean put away the letter and picked up the bag of letters on the ground. He was ready to go back to the castle and slowly open it. Ryan Castle, 2nd floor. 3 figures came to Old Fouline's study room and knocked on the door. The door opened. Sander was the one who opened the door. Old Fouline had arranged a middle-aged maid to stay in the hall because of his old age. Sander was personally in charge of his daily life. "Come." Sander smiled as he saw the 3. The 3 were flattered. "Greetings, young patriarch." Sander smiled and invited the 3 into the room. Old Fouline was sitting on a wrought-tan chair in the study room. He smiled as he looked at the 3 of them. "Your friend Dean has sent you a letter. He wants you to help him. He is short of manpower. You have been with me for a long time. You have seen the basic etiquette, preferences, rules, clothing brands, and luxury items of the aristocracy. Now Dean needs you. I hope you can assist him." The 3 were Barton and the other 2. They nodded as they heard Old Fouline's words. Old Fouline smiled. "Go and say hello to him for me." "Yes," Barton replied. The 3 left the study room and went downstairs. They sat in the carriage of the Ryan family. Barton lowered his voice. "We can finally do big things with Dean." "Well," Joseph grinned, "it's uncomfortable to live in this aristocratic house. In the future, we can't call him Dean anymore. Otherwise, we'll expose our roots." Well, in the future we will call him Mr. Dean or Master. Although we came out with him, but without Dean, there wouldn't be the life we have today. In the past, I wouldn't have thought that we would be able to use silk to make rags, milk to wash our faces, and even a small stone would be worth hundreds of thousands of copper coins. Compared to now, we're simply raising pigs. Crone's face lit up as he spoke. Barton smiled and said, "You're wrong. The pigs here eat much better than us. They have meat for every meal." Joseph laughed. "Dean, oh no. I should call him young master. He said that he will lead us to great things in the future. Now he is a senior architect of the Temple of Elements. He reports to us every day. He's like a dazzling pearl. We didn't make the wrong choice. We will have good days in the future if we follow him." Crone smiled. "We can't run away from good days. But don't forget the reason why young master brought us here. The first reason is that he trusts us. The second reason is that we have a clean background. It's convenient for us to do things. The last few times young master asked us to do those things. I guess it will be the same in the future. If we make a mistake, then..." Barton's expression turned serious as he said, "What we're doing is shameful. If we're exposed and arrested, we can't drag the young master into this. Without him, we wouldn't be here today, and there wouldn't be a Barton." Joseph and Crone looked at each other. Crone said, "Do you think we are the kind of people who would betray our brothers?" Barton's expression softened. "Of course I understand you. Let's not talk about this. We are almost there. Be careful of the walls." "Well," Joseph nodded, "he should be watched by all parties. There are many spies of other consortia outside the castle. Master, 3 people have come to see you." Nicholas entered the room and reported. Dean casually said, "Let them in." "Yes." Nicholas turned and left. After a moment, he came back with Barton and the other 2. Dean stopped reading the letter and looked at the 3 of them. There were obvious changes in the 3 of them after a long time. They were no longer timid like they used to be. Their clothes were relatively plain, but they had their own temperament. At first glance, it was hard to associate them with the slums. But if he looked closely, he could see the flaws in their bodies. For example, Barton had a small lump on his neck. This was an obvious change caused by radiation. Crone's left hand only grew to his elbow. Half his sleeve was empty. He was a disabled person. Duddy knew that nicotine should have noticed it as well. He looked at the 3 calmly. "Long time no see. Sit down." Although Barton and the other 2 knew that Dean had the same origin as them, but now that they saw him, the latter's temperament made them feel restrained. It was difficult to call him by his name like before. Barton sat on the chair next to Dean and said, "Dean, Master, what do you want from us?" Dean glanced at him. He didn't correct Barton's address. Instead, he was quite satisfied. Of course, it was not because of his vanity, but from this small matter, he could see that the 3 of them had indeed grown up. Their characters were a lot more cautious. They didn't recklessly expose their close relationship. He immediately asked, "Barton, do you believe in Holy Church?" Barton was startled. He didn't understand why Duddy was asking this question. He glanced at Nicotine and honestly said, "I'm skeptical." Dean couldn't help but smile as he heard this. Nicholas also smiled and curiously looked at Dean. Dean smiled. "From now on you will believe in the Holy Church." Barton blinked in confusion. Dean smiled. "I mean you will enter the Holy Church and become a knight of the Holy Church." Barton was startled. "Master, I also want to do that, but they won't want me." Leave it to me." Dean smiled. "You are only responsible for wholeheartedly loyal to the Holy Church after you enter the Holy Church." Barton suddenly understood. "Young Master, are you planning to place me within the Radiant Church and have me serve you there?" Dean shook his head. "You just need to do what I say and wholeheartedly loyal to the Holy Church. You don't need to think about anything else. You will never know me again. Do you understand?" Barton was somewhat at a loss. He seemed to understand, but at the same time, he didn't. He wanted to ask, but after some hesitation, he held back and said, "I understand." Dean nodded in satisfaction. "What about you? Do you want to be a mighty general?" Joseph was taken aback. "Young Master, you want me to join the military?" "Smart." Duddy smiled. "Just like Barton, You should develop well in the military and forget about me. You just need to think about how to be a good general." Joseph and Barton looked at each other. Although they were a loss, they nodded. "I know." Dean looked at Crone. "You will follow me." Chapter 321. This is a gift for you. It's up to you to fight for it in the future. Dean waved his hand. Nicholas, who was next to him, took out 3 small porcelain bottles and handed them to him. He pushed the bottles to the front of Barton and the other 2. "This is an opportunity for you." Barton and the other 2 looked at each other. Although they didn't know what was in the bottle, they still stood up and thanked Dean. Dean nodded. The 3 of them had matured a lot under the guidance of old Feline. "Go and prepare. Use this to improve your body. Butler, take them to rest." "Yes," Nicholas replied. Barton and the other 2 took their own bottles and left after Nicholas. They went to the guest room on the 2nd floor and closed the door. The 3 of them couldn't help but look at the small porcelain bottle in their hands. Barton twisted the cork open and looked at the light. He saw a pale green liquid. He was startled, and his eyelids suddenly twitched. He said, "This is spring of light." Joseph recalled Dean's previous words. He couldn't help but hold the small porcelain bottle tightly. Crone bit the cork and took a deep breath. Crone bit the cork and took a deep breath. He couldn't help but open his eyes and said in surprise, "It should be, I have heard about the water of light before. It is said that this is the holy water of the holy spring of light where the god of light bathes. It can wash away all the dirt in the world, including diseases and plagues. It can also purify the radiation value in the body. Previously, young master asked us to improve our bodies. This thing must be the water of light. Moreover, if he wants you two to join the Holy Church and the military, if you join with your current body, you won't pass the physical examination, so he will definitely give us the water of light to improve our physique." Barton was startled as he clenched the small porcelain bottle in his hand. Joseph's surprised expression gradually turned into silence. "No matter what happens to Dean in the future, I will do my best to help." Crone smiled and said, "Needless to say, let's try this first. I heard that if you take it orally once a day, 1 drop at a time for about a month, it will greatly reduce the radiation value. If you take 2 drops at a time, the effect will be more obvious. But you can't be greedy. If you take 7 or 8 drops at a time, not only will the effect not improve, but it will also cause harm to the body and even death." Joseph shook the small bottle in his hand and said, "There should be a few hundred drops in here. It should be enough to improve our physiques." Barton nodded slowly, took a deep breath, and said, "From now on, the 3 of us will go our separate ways. But no matter where we go, I hope that our hearts will always be together." "Yes." Joseph nodded heavily. "That's right," Crone said heroically. The next day, Duddian called Barton and asked him to get in the car with him. "I'll take you to a place today." Duddian sat firmly on the chair and looked at Barton. Barton had already taken the water of light yesterday, and he felt that some of the dark brown patches on his chest caused by the accumulation of radiation seemed to have lightened a little. Today, he had changed into formal clothes, and his hair was neatly combed. Beneath his brown hair, his eyes were bright and full of intelligence. Although he was not considered handsome, he had a unique and unforgettable appearance. "Where to?" Barton asked curiously. Duddian smiled. "I adopted you, but all I could give you is friendship. Now I hope that you can get your own family." Barton was startled. He was no longer the stupid Barton from before. He immediately responded, "Are you going to send me to another family?" "Yes." Duddian nodded. Barton smiled. "My family has long been gone since I was conscious. I only have one biological parent, but I will never feel any affection from them. There is only hatred." Dudien's eyes lit up as he gently patted Barton's shoulder. "Nothing in this world is destined to belong to you, but the things you fight for belong to you, including family." Barton was startled for a moment. After a moment, the carriage reached the suburbs and stopped in a small town. "Master, we have arrived." The coachman called out from outside. Duddian got off the carriage and looked up. It was a small and medium-sized manor. It was relatively dilapidated, but the buildings in the town were considered as big families. The lawn of the manor had long been dilapidated and exposed to the sand. At first glance, it was obvious that there was no gardener to take care of it. Dudian came to the front of the manor and waved his finger to the coachman. The coachman came forward and called out, "Is anyone here?" The gate of the manor opened and a gray-haired old woman came out. She was wearing reading glasses and walking stick. She looked at Dean and others. When she saw the carriage behind Dean, she saw the noble gold pattern. She stepped forward and said enthusiastically, "Hello, hello." Dudian pushed the guardrail of the manor and greeted the old woman. "Old lady, where's your child?" The old woman replied, "They are in the house. It is cold outside, so they are burning a fire inside. I came to visit them." Dudian said, "Come in, please come in." The old woman said. Dudian followed her into the house. The coachman stopped outside the manor. Barton consciously followed behind Dudian. He looked around and realized that this would be his new home in the future. The house was spacious, although it was old, but the area was large enough. There was a huge portrait hanging on the wall of the furnace in the center of the hall. It was a heroic youth wearing a knight's armor. "This is my grandfather." The old woman looked back at Dudian. Her eyes were full of pride. Dudian smiled. "Love, why don't you come out to greet the guests?" His voice was calm but penetrating. After a moment, a stout middle-aged man ran out from the small hall behind the furnace wall. His face was full of beard and his clothes were dirty. There were traces of sewing on the corners of his clothes. His eyes lit up as he saw Dean. He respectfully said, "Mr. Dean, how come you are here? Please sit down." Dudian didn't give him a good look. "Is it cold today? Do you need your mother to come out to greet the guests?" The middle-aged man turned his head and pushed the old woman next to him. "Mother, go back to your room. There is nothing for you to do here. Go." The old woman hurriedly said, All right. You talk. Son, talk nicely. Be polite." With that said, she was pushed out of the hall. Dean looked around. It could be described as a poor house. The paint on the walls had fallen off. The hanging old clock had long stopped swinging, but it was not repaired, so it was full of dust. The middle-aged man saw Dudian looking around. He took out a chair and wiped it with his sleeve. "Mr. Dean, please sit down." Dean didn't bother to be polite with him. He pulled a chair and sat down. "Your great-grandfather was a knight who galloped on the battlefield. The foundation he left behind has been passed down to your generation. The spirit of the knight has been contaminated with dust. It's unsightly." The middle-aged man was embarrassed. He didn't dare to answer. Dudian saw the middle-aged man's appearance. He knew that his self-esteem had long been humble. He lost interest in talking. He pointed to Barton. "This is the person I'm talking about. From today, he will be transferred to your name. He is your son. He will inherit your surname." The pudgy middle-aged man looked at Barton and suddenly saw that something was wrong. He said awkwardly, "Lord Dew, you see, although I promised to accept this person as my son, after all, I have to pay legal responsibility, and this should be a boy from the slums, this. Dudian glanced at him. He took out a stack of gold notes from his pocket. He took out 10 of them. Each of them had a denomination of 100 gold coins. 10 of them were 1,000 gold coins. He said, "This is for your care. It's not a one-time payment. It's only for a year. Do you understand?" The middle-aged man's eyes lit up when he saw the gold notes. But when he heard Dudian say that it was only for a year, his eyes widened. He quickly said, "I understand. I understand everything you said. I'm willing to transfer even 100 of them." "Ha ha! Mr. Dean is really generous." Dudian raised his hand to stop him. "But remember, if you reveal too much, then you won't have a good time." The middle-aged man said, "I can absolutely guarantee that I will keep my mouth shut. I won't leak even half a word." Dudian turned to Barton. "From today on, you will follow his surname. Her Barton. I'll come back to see you in a month. I hope that you have integrated into the family. I'll take you to the night assessment." Barton looked at the ugly middle-aged man in front of him. He didn't expect that this man would be his nominal father. He looked at Dudian. "I'll take care of it." Dudian nodded. He got up and tightened his coat. He left the hall. "Mr. Dean, please sit for a while." The middle-aged man called out as he chased after Dudian. Dudian didn't look back. He waved his hand and went out of the manor. He got on the carriage and left. After returning to the castle, Dadian called Joseph to the carriage and took him to another family. This family was also down and out. The ancestor of the family was a war hero. Although he wasn't a particularly well-known hero, but he was a little hero who had won the banner of bravely kill the enemy. He was an excellent soldier. He was a lieutenant. His foundation wasn't deep. Perhaps he didn't handle the relationship well. After his death, the family was weak from the peak. Now, there was only an ancestral house and a banner hanging in the middle of the hall. Every day, there would be servants to clean the dust. Although it was faded and somewhat broken, it still looked clean. It was the same as the previous Hull family. In addition to wealth, this family had declined. Dadian had personally selected this family, so he was mentally prepared. This was one of the reasons why he chose this family. After settling Joseph in this family, Dadian left the place. The rest of the matters were left to them. Dadian called Crone back to the castle. One of the reasons was that Crone's arm was deformed. Crone had a deformed arm. It would be difficult for him to work with one arm. This is for you. Dadian took out a stack of gold notes and gave it to Crone. The total value was tens of thousands of gold coins. Select a group of excellent and capable people to form our own intelligence network. Ask me if you don't understand anything. Crone's eyes lit up as he saw the gold notes. He swallowed his saliva. Master, I don't need so much. The purpose of money is to buy capable people. Dadian replied. Crone put away the gold notes. I'll be strict with the selection. Dadian waved it back. 2 days later, Dean went to the castle every day to collect 100 pounds of materials. He was ready to return to the castle when he remembered the invitation letter he received last time. He immediately went back to the castle. Dadian went to the main building in the middle of the castle and asked, Is everyone here? The staff in front of the temple recognized Dean. Architects have been here for a long time. Architect Dean, please come in. Dadian nodded and followed the staff inside. They went all the way to the top floor of the building. Dadian could hear the laughter coming from the conference room. He went over and knocked on the door. The door opened, and an unfamiliar middle-aged man appeared. The latter looked at Dadian in confusion. Architect Dean, who won the epic medal. Dadian nodded with a smile. Please come in, the middle-aged man said enthusiastically as he saw Dadian admit. The people in the conference room stopped talking as they heard the middle-aged man's words. Dadian saw 7 or 8 people sitting inside the conference room. Tiffany was sitting in the first row of seats. She looked at Dadian with a smile on her face. Dadian glanced at the crowd and nodded. Dadian greets the elders. You are too polite. We judge heroes by talent. Who will judge by age? A black-haired old man laughed. Dadian listened to the latter 2 sentences, which had the feeling of Chinese style. He looked at him and found that his face was Asian. His heart felt a little familiar. In the giant wall of Sylvia, there were very few Asian faces. Most of them were Western European faces. Haha, Elder Lin is right. Another middle-aged man laughed. Tiffany waved to Dadian. Come and sit next to me. Come and sit next to me. Don't, I have an empty seat. The others said enthusiastically. Dadian smiled and sat down next to Tiffany. I heard that today is the seminar. It's my first time to participate in it. I hope you can forgive me if I don't understand the rules. It's a small matter. Everyone has their first time. A middle-aged man sitting on Du Jian's left side laughed. Oomph. A middle-aged man with a hooked nose snorted. Everyone knows that today is the seminar. I thought that today is a bootlicking session. If you don't want to talk about inventions, then I'll go back. Huh. Chapter 322. The people who tried to strike up a conversation with Dean were embarrassed as they heard the middle-aged man's words. Tiffany looked at the man and whispered to Dean, Don't be offended. His name is Gusta. His character is like that. Dean smiled. He thought that if it was just a simple character, then he would be a good person. Everyone, since almost everyone is here and it's time, let's start today's seminar. Sitting at the head of the table was an old man in his 60s. He was wearing a red cotton-padded jacket and said with a smile. Everyone restrained themselves and revealed serious expressions. The theme of this conference is the same as last time's plant illustrated handbook. Last time we discussed Langi. This time, we will be talking about Thorn On, which is ranked 5th among the poisonous plants. This is the basic information of Thorn On. If anyone is familiar with Thorn On, feel free to express your opinion. The old man in the red cotton jacket distributed a stack of information to everyone. Dean took his own copy and passed the rest to the back. He saw a sketch pattern on the material. It was the thorn. What surprised him was that the thorn looked very familiar. It was a plant from China that he had seen in the super chip. It was distributed in the Northeast, North, and other places. Its original name was cocklebur. It could be seen in many villages in the north. There is cocklebur in the illustration of the giant wall. It seems that the location of the giant wall is in the old Russian territory. Dean's eyes lit up. Tiffany opened her mouth. Although thorn contains toxins, but as far as I know, there was a report about a doctor who was treating a patient in a remote town. His child picked up thorn to play with and put it into the medicine by mistake. As a result, the patient didn't get poisoned after taking the medicine. Instead, his leprosy, which hadn't been cured for many years, was cured. Is it that amazing? An uncle in his 50s asked in surprise. Dean nodded. The treatment of leprosy was indeed one of the medicinal effects of cocklebur. Although it was poisonous, but the medicinal effect and other economic value were very high. It could be regarded as merit outweighs the demerit. If a small amount of it is poisoned, it will also cause dizziness, nausea, and abdominal pain. If it is used in a war, it might have a pretty good effect, especially in the recent war with the barbarians outside the borders. The paladin Kratos, had already broken through the fortress. If this thing is dried and made into powder and sprinkled in the wind, it should be able to play a greater role in a battle. It can also be considered as a type of large-scale poison-killing magic. The middle-aged man with an aquiline nose who spoke previously had a deep gaze as he slowly said thoughtfully. Dean's heart moved as he heard the words. He was quite interested in the man. Powder for the enemy. The old man in the red cotton-padded jacket was startled, and his eyes lit up. He clapped his hands and said, "Good idea. Huh. As long as the wind direction is good, it can be used as the poison-killing divine art. Even if there is no wind, it can be used as a human windmill." Man-powered windmill was a new wood-type invention. It was classified as a 4-star medium-grade invention. The creator was a woodmaster. Dean nodded slightly. It was a good idea, but the toxicity of cocklebur would require a large amount of investment to have an effect. Don't underestimate the difference. A large amount of investment would lead to an extension of time and distance. These 2 points were the key to the war. It was one of the core factors that would affect the outcome of the war. Therefore, the idea of using cocklebur powder in the war was good, but the actual effect was almost negligible. Tiffany, who was next to him, shook her head and said, "If it is thrown into the battlefield, it will be very difficult for the powder to fly far. If the powder is too fine, it will easily be swept away by the wind. If the powder particles are too big, the distance will be reduced. When the enemy reaches the throwing distance, the 2 armies will be in a melee. The powder will hurt their own people." Tiffany shook her head and said, "That's right." Tiffany, who was next to him, shook her head. Her teacher was good at the production of military supplies. Tiffany also majored in this area. She knew that the most important thing about military supplies was the distance. So when she heard the words powder for the enemy, it was the first thing that came to her mind. The others heard Tiffany's words. They thought for a moment and nodded. Yes, it is too risky to use it to make the powder for the enemy. It is not feasible. Gustus snorted as he heard the opposition. If the powder can't be made, then we can turn it into water. Won't the water be affected by the wind? Everyone was startled. The red cotton-padded jacket old man's eyes lit up. Yes, if the powder is too light, then we can put it in a plastic bag and throw it into the battlefield. It will have a miraculous effect. That is a good idea. With this method, wouldn't it be easy for the military to kill the barbarians? Tiffany frowned for a long time, but couldn't say anything. Although she felt that there was something wrong, she couldn't say it for a while. Suddenly, her eyes swept to the slender arm next to her. She suddenly remembered the person sitting next to her. She looked at him and saw a smile on his face. It seemed that he was listening with relish. She was slightly disappointed. After all, he was too young and his foundation was too shallow. She whispered, "Dean, do you have any ideas? Why don't you tell us? We can exchange ideas if we don't understand it." Although her voice was soft, the people around heard it. They couldn't help but stop talking. Their eyes gathered on the youngest boy. Dean wanted to listen to their ideas. He hoped to stimulate some inspiration. He didn't expect that Tiffany would pull the fire towards him. He sighed in his heart, but smiled as usual. "I've been greatly inspired by the elder's words. I hope you won't make fun of me." "Haha, you are too polite. The wood element is broad and profound. Who would dare to say that they are omniscient and omnipotent? There is no harm in saying it." The old man laughed as he gave Dean a way out. "Yes," the others echoed. Dean nodded. "I think that the value of thorny thorn can be divided into 3 areas. The first is the economic field. The stem fiber can be made into sacks, ropes, and so on. Its seeds can be extracted into essential oil, which can replace tung oil and fat oil. Moreover, it can be processed into raw materials for high-grade spices. In addition, its powder isn't only used on the battlefield. In daily life, it can be used as insect repellent powder. These are the economic values it provides. The second point is the medicinal value. Tiffany said that there was a report that this thing can cure leprosy. Let's not talk about whether the report is true or not, but it is undeniable that there are other things besides toxins. Perhaps it can cure some diseases. So if there's an in-depth study, then we can know whether this thing has the effect of curing leprosy or not. If it can, then its value will be much higher. The third point is the value of war. Whether it is a foreign military war or a war of wealth caused by the first 2 areas, it has no small role. Dean looked around at the crowd and didn't speak again. The conference room fell into a brief silence. In addition to being shocked by this long speech, there were also people who fell into deep thought. As a result, the entire conference room was silent for a few minutes. After a long time, the old man in the red cotton-padded jacket recovered. He clapped his hands and cheered. "Well said." The others reacted and looked at Dean in amazement. They cheered along with the old man in the red cotton-padded jacket. There was a trace of awe in their eyes as they looked at the youth. Not only did they admire Dean's past achievements, but his words just now made them feel the difference between this junior and them. He was quick-witted and had a strong ability to plan. Such a perspective of thinking allowed him to see many things that they couldn't see for a while. They had been immersed in research for decades. They knew that it wasn't their own knowledge that was holding them back, but their way of thinking. Knowledge could be learned, but it was difficult to change the way of thinking. It would determine a person's life. "It's the first time that I can see the problem so clearly." Tiffany looked at Dean. There was a trace of admiration and appreciation on her mature and intellectual face. Dean smiled. As a person from the old era, his way of thinking was influenced by the social environment. He liked to categorize things systematically. It would make things clearer and clearer. In the early backward society, the boundaries between many things were very vague. It was difficult to classify the details. There wasn't a strong concept of such things. It seemed that with the development of society and technology, the division of everything was more detailed. It was like the research in the scientific world. From macro to micro, the social system was the same. Mr. Dean's thinking is really quick. Have you studied the thorns in depth before? You actually thought of making hemp rope out of the stem of this thing. I didn't think of this for a while. According to what you said, this little thorn prickly on is simply a treasure. An old man in his 60s sighed. Dean smiled. I'm flattered. I didn't think that a small thorns would have such an effect. If according to Mr. Dean, then the other plants would have endless uses. No wonder Mr. Dean has such achievements at such a young age. I'm convinced. Another middle-aged man laughed. The old man in red jacket smiled. Today's seminar is over. I think the ranking of thorns in the Plant Illustrated Handbook will change. Mr. Dean's analysis of thorns is so thorough. Dean was helpless. He thought that he would be able to hear something interesting today. He didn't expect that it would be a compliment to him. He sighed, but still maintained a smile on the surface. That's all I have to say. I'll listen to the seniors. The old man in red jacket laughed. You don't have to be modest. We are senior architects. Do you have anything else to add about thorns? Everyone looked at each other. The aquiline nose old man looked at Duddy and slowly said, if you count the effect of turning the water into water that I proposed, then the effect of the light should be played to the extreme. Yes. The old man in his 60s nodded in agreement. The others immediately seconded the idea. Dean didn't agree with this point. After all many people had seconded the old man's point of view, wouldn't it be a slap in the face if he completely overturned it? He would not offend unnecessary people just because of a momentary outburst. Moreover, in real life, people would not submit to you just because you were powerful. If you made others lose face, no matter how powerful you were, they would still hate you and harm you. Therefore, there was a need to have a sense of propriety. The middle-aged man with an aquiline nose saw that Dean didn't have any objection. He said, since there is no objection, then the results of the seminar will be submitted to the temple. I believe that the people in the temple will give a high evaluation. The old man in the red cotton-padded jacket laughed and said, just the concept that Mr. Dew proposed is enough to earn us a lot of points. According to our old rules, whoever proposes the conclusion will get the points. The rest of the people will get 10% of the total points as participation points, regardless of whether they express their opinions or not. This time, we will submit a total of 3 points, which are the 3 areas that Mr. Dew just mentioned. All of them will be recorded under Mr. Dew's name. I have no objection. Tiffany was the first to agree. The others also agreed. The hook-nosed, middle-aged man's face darkened, and he said, I have no objections to the first 2 theories, but I was the one who suggested the 3rd theory, bloodshed land. Furthermore, Mr. Dew only suggested the theoretical concept of bloodshed land and did not use it in practice. I don't think he is the one who signed this theory, right? The old man in the red cotton-padded jacket was slightly startled. He looked at Dean and saw that the latter was smiling as if he didn't care at all. The old man in the red cotton-padded jacket was slightly relieved. Compared with the hook-nosed, middle-aged man, Dean's potential was naturally greater. However, he didn't want to offend the hook-nosed, middle-aged man. After all, excluding Dean, the latter was the youngest person in this conference room. Mr. Dean, what do you think? The old man in red jacket asked. Dean laughed. I don't have any objection. The old man in the red cotton-padded jacket heaved a sigh of relief and said, then it's decided. Let's call it a day. I'll take my leave first. With that, he turned around and left the conference room. The others also said goodbye to Dean and left. Tiffany looked at Duddy and, you really are a genius. You can earn points wherever you go. It's very difficult for us to earn points. In the past, the seminar would take a few hours and we wouldn't get any points as a reward. But this time, it was over in less than half an hour. Moreover, your theory is very novel. I'm sure that there will be points as a reward. We will be able to benefit from your light and earn some points. Chapter 323. Dean left the castle after saying goodbye to Tiffany. He thought that he could learn from other people's experience and gain something. He didn't expect that the so-called seminar would stay at the basic level. There was no unique innovation. He was quite disappointed, but it wasn't that he didn't gain anything. At least he knew the level of other senior architects. The weaker the others were, the better it was for him. Dean went into his underground laboratory after returning to the castle by carriage. The shark spear that he had made last time had a defect of insufficient launching power. He had thought of a solution in the past few days, although it would cause an uproar if the method was exposed. But he had made the design drawings and the complete model as well as the overall concept. It would be the time to consolidate his position in the temple. Moreover, he needed to use his identity as a member of the temple in order for Barton and Joseph to smoothly enter the military and the Holy Church. The Temple of Elements. In a certain castle, Kipo sat in the chair and gently rubbed his neck. He threw the thesis in front of him aside. Since he had passed the age of 60, his health had been deteriorating day by day. In the past, it was very easy for him to hold the position of reviewing the thesis of a senior oracle. After all, the number of senior oracles was limited, and the time for seminars was even less. Often, there were only 7 or 8 theses in a month, and if there were more than 10, he could finish reviewing them quickly and effortlessly. But now, before he had even finished reading a thesis, he felt his shoulders were sore, his muscles were swollen, and his vision was a little dizzy. He leaned on the chair and gently gasped for breath. He looked at the maid next to him. The maid had served him for many years. She immediately came over to help him massage his shoulders. Alas, I'm getting old. Kempo sighed. He was no longer in the mood to conceive new theurgy. After all, he was a master. If the theurgy he conceived was too low level, it would only lower his value. High-level theurgy required a lot of energy to conceive and produce. He was powerless to do so. He could only impart some of his own inspirations to his students and let them study and produce them. If they became famous, this glory would also accumulate to him. He only needed to review a senior oracle's research paper every few days to receive additional generous rewards from a shrine. However, this dignified and easy task made him feel a little strenuous. He had thought of using his identity to exchange for God's blessing in the divine hall to transform his body and restore his vitality. The divine hall also advocated this and even had a discount for old masters like him. However, he had heard some rumors about God's blessing. Coupled with what he had seen and heard, he did not want to touch this filthy thing. Even if the latter could bring him a body full of power and a long life, he did not want to touch it. Master, this is the monthly thesis of the 13th castle. A middle-aged man dressed like a butler carefully entered the room. There was a trace of irritation in Kopa's heart, but he still nodded and said, "Leave it here." The butler respectfully presented it and retreated. Kipos glanced at the clean cover of the thesis. He was too lazy to pay attention to it. He closed his eyes and enjoyed the kneading of the maid. After a moment, he suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the thesis that had just been presented. Recently, our Wood faction has a little guy named Dean. He has been promoted to senior architect. It seems that he has been assigned to the castle of the 13 castles. Thinking of this, he immediately sat up straight. The maid immediately stopped and retreated to the side. Kipos was satisfied with the neat handwriting. He glanced at the paper and soon saw the word Dean. The more he read, the more surprised he became. After a moment, he closed the paper. There was a trace of thought in his eyes. It seems that this little guy's shortcomings aren't as long as we old guys think. He has been in the temple for less than a year, but he is able to analyze a small plant like thorn so thoroughly. His perspective is also very sharp. In the future, he will not only become a master, but also a relatively outstanding master. Then, with the help of the epic medal, it is possible to get the title of outstanding master. He pondered for a moment and immediately picked up the pen to write. Such a talent should be roped in as soon as possible while he's still young. The financial group he belongs to is the New World Financial Group, and he hasn't been invited by any other financial group. It's clear that he's a loyal person. Kipos wrote his comments and reward points at the end of the thesis. He gently blew the ink to dry faster. Then he took out a letter and put into the envelope. He called the butler. "Send this letter to Architect Dean. I have finished reviewing the thesis. Send it back." The butler was surprised for a moment. He turned around and retreated. The 13 castles. Tiffany, the old man in the red cotton-padded jacket, the middle-aged man with an aquiline nose, and another middle-aged man in black suit were sitting in the manor. They were drinking afternoon tea. They were chatting about their own insights and curiosity. Since the emergence of the metal alloy, steel and alloy materials have quickly occupied the market. Our wood appliances and inventions have fallen behind. Even our bows have fallen behind. In the past, we used to use wooden bows. But now those guys from the metal family are trying to use steel to make bows and strings. Humph! They don't even think about elasticity. Another middle-aged man in black suit snorted. Tiffany nodded slightly. She had a deep understanding of the situation. The elimination of wood from a market was a big blow to the architects of wood element. It meant that their wood element could be replaced by the metal element. Moreover, it would be better than the metal element. I've been studying the difference between wood and metal recently. I believe that the importance of wood is absolutely greater than that of metal. The old man in the red cotton padded jacket had a profound look in his eyes. His life's hobby and energy were dedicated to wood. His feelings towards wood were deep in his bones. When he was young, he would hug wood to sleep every day. He couldn't accept that cold metal could replace wood. The middle-aged man with an aquiline nose snorted. He was about to say something when suddenly a carriage came from outside. A man came down from the carriage. It was the middle-aged butler who had been in front of Kipos. He saw Tiffany and the other 3 people in the manor. His eyes lit up as he strode towards them. "Why are you so leisurely?" The old man in the red cotton padded jacket was obviously very familiar with him. He was surprised when he saw him. "You finished the review so quickly?" "Well, Master Kipos was reviewing another paper today. You happened to catch up with him, so you reviewed it together," the middle-aged butler said with a smile. Tiffany laughed. "That's good luck. Let's have a look. What is the result?" The middle-aged butler smiled and handed the paper to her. "You read it first. I have something to do. See you later." Then he turned around and left. He got on the carriage and went straight out of the castle. As the carriage drove away, Tiffany quickly opened the wrapping paper on the outside of the paper. She quickly glanced at the comments and rewards at the end. She was surprised. 200 points? So many points? The old man in the red cotton padded jacket moved closer to take a look and was also surprised. He said with joy, "Just the first one is worth 200 points. This is equivalent to the points of a 2-star divine artwork. Wouldn't it be 600 points if there are 3 of them? Take out 10% and give it to us. We can get more than a dozen points." Ha ha! The hook-nosed middle-aged man's heart skipped a beat. Although he was a high-ranking architect, it was still a big profit to get 200 points from a seminar. After all, even as a high-ranking architect, it was not easy to produce a 2-star divine technique. Tiffany sighed. "Just the thorn plant has so many points. If we write down all the other plants in the Plant Illustrated Handbook, wouldn't we be able to get master's points?" The old man in the red cotton padded jacket smiled. "You are thinking too much. This time we gave 200 points. It should be because of the use of this thinking. Any plant can be analyzed and used according to this thinking. So if we use this method to study the next plant, I estimate that we can get 10 consolation points." "That's true." Tiffany opened the second chapter and saw that it was still 200 points. There was also a hint of appreciation in the comments. But when she opened the third chapter, a smile appeared on her face. She blinked her eyes and looked again. There was no point reward. The comments were very simple. Not feasible. The aquiline-nosed middle-aged man guessed that the third paper was his. His heart jumped as he saw Tiffany's stunned expression. He was pleasantly surprised. Could it be that he didn't get 200 points? Tiffany looked up at him and saw the surprise in his eyes. The corners of her mouth twitched as she took out his paper and handed it to him. The aquiline-nosed middle-aged man quickly looked at the paper. His heart was filled with excitement. He was stunned on the spot. When the old man in the red cotton padded jacket saw his expression, he immediately consoled him. Since Master Pose says it's not feasible, it means that there's still some problem here. I think if we want to understand more, we should visit the military and understand more. Perhaps we'll know where the problem lies. The aquiline-nosed middle-aged man's face turned blue and red. He gripped the paper and left. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Studying got up on time. He ate breakfast while reading the newspaper. At the same time, he told Nicholas to rent a mammoth carriage. He also told him to prepare some wrapping cloth. Military newspaper. The barbarians have occupied the Red Maple Mountains. The terrain is easy to defend and difficult to attack. The military launched the 4th night attack at 7 o'clock yesterday. The effect was obvious and the barbarians were defeated. It is reported that the barbarians are coming to the Red Maple Mountains. The army hasn't occupied the Red Maple Mountains yet, but they were attacked again. Dudeen glanced at the newspaper. He was in a high position and had many exchanges with Old Feline. He had learned how to read the newspaper. The fourth night attack was true, but the barbarians were defeated. It was likely that they were only able to annihilate a small team. Moreover, he had seen the map and deduced the terrain of the Red Maple Mountains. According to the number of troops sent by the military, it would be too difficult to attack the Red Maple Mountains unless they sent the guards. If the guards are dispatched, then it would be recorded in the newspaper. But it didn't mention the guards. So it was difficult to attack the Red Maple Mountains by relying on the surface soldiers of the military. He had guessed the purpose of the military. They were ready to carry out the final defense at the walls of the living area. The current attack on the Red Maple Mountains was just a symbolic harassment to express their duties. They didn't want to be gossiped by consortiums or Holy Church. As for why would they rely on the walls of the living area to defend? In the past few days, Dean had been thinking about this problem. There were many reasons, but he thought that the two most likely reasons were: first, relying on the wall defense could reduce the consumption of military soldiers. Second, through the wall defense, it could reflect the sacrifices and efforts of the military to protect the civilians. Thus, it could win the love of the people and quell the grievances caused by the military's repeated conscription during the defense of the fortress. Not only do I have to win the war, but I have to maximize my own interests. Dudian put down a newspaper and muttered. He felt that he had learned a little bit, but he didn't reap the joy of the harvest. He sat quietly in the hall after breakfast. He was thinking about other things. His left hand gently rubbed a lump of soft clay. This was another method he had thought of to exercise the flexibility of his left hand. It wasn't mud, but plasticine. It could be easily made with the current technology. It wasn't difficult to make. It could be made with salt, oil, and flour as the main materials. He rubbed his left hand into a ball. Plasticine was small and portable. He could exercise at any time. Moreover, he didn't feel it, so he wouldn't feel sore no matter how long he rubbed it. A moment later, Nicotine returned and said, "Young master, everything you wanted is ready." Dudian nodded and continued to wait. Sergei and Gwyneth came back after a moment. Both of them were a bit less casual in front of Dudian. In the past few days, they had a clear understanding of the youth's energy and background. They used to think that Dudian had someone behind him, so they were worried about him. But after a period of contact, they knew that the youth's background was him. Dudian had brought back a lot of letters and people who had come to visit him in the past few days. There were journalists from news agencies, diplomats from large consortiums, ordinary nobles, rich businessmen, and so on. There were all kinds of people. It showed how powerful the head of the castle was. He wasn't inferior to the nobles or business tycoons who had been in business for decades. "What's the situation there?" Dudian asked. Chapter 3:24. Dean slightly frowned as he looked at him. "Don't let others hear this in front of me. Otherwise they will think that I told you this. It won't be good for us if it spreads out." Sergei replied, "What are you afraid of? They're the enemies that are blocking our way. We are also enemies to them. Are you afraid that they will know about this?" Dean said, "Everyone is an enemy, but there is a priority. If you're too ostentatious, then there will always be people who don't like you. They will push your ranking forward." Sergei was startled and didn't speak anymore. Gwyneth looked at Dean. "Master, the barbarians have occupied the Red Maple Mountains. They have burned and looted all the residents in the nearby towns. It seems that they aren't in a hurry to attack the residential areas. There will be more innocent sacrifices if this continues. Should we do something?" Dean looked at her. "What do you mean? Although I don't know much about you, but I can see that young master has a lot of energy. If you contribute, then you may be able to improve the situation of the battlefield or push the military to launch the attack earlier." Gwyneth stared at Dean as she slowly said. When Sergei heard this, he laughed strangely. "I can't tell that you still have such a compassionate heart after being tortured in the Thornflower prison. No wonder you were a disciplinary enforcer before you entered the prison. You really have a noble character and a kind heart." Gwyneth narrowed her eyes as she glanced at him. Sergei's eyelids twitched. He smiled and shrugged his shoulders. He didn't talk much. Dean quietly looked at the girl who was the same age as him. "You overestimate me. Although I have some weight, but it's difficult to influence the entire border war with my own strength. Moreover, what are the benefits for me? Gwyneth stared at him. There are many benefits. If you win the war, you will harvest honor and the love of the people. I believe that the military will be able to eradicate the barbarians once the war is launched. Even if the military can't do it, they will ask for help from the inner wall. Once the inner wall intervenes, then the barbarians will be destroyed. Honor and love. Dean smiled. Do you know that a word can change a person's life? A word can make a person die. The so-called honor and love don't need to take such a big risk to get them. Gwyneth said, the biggest benefit is that you will have peace of mind. Do you want to watch innocent civilians die? Dean looked in her deep eyes. There was a trace of surprise in his heart. He didn't expect that the girl who had crawled out of hell would have such a kind heart. He could feel that the latter wanted him to help from the bottom of her heart. But at the same time, he could feel a strong killing intent and hatred from the girl. Could it be that after suffering all kinds of torture, her hatred didn't spread, and she was still focused on her enemies? He was silent for a moment, but calmly said, I can. Gwyneth was startled as she heard his answer. Her face turned pale. She gently bit her lips as she bowed her head and clenched her fists. Sergei, Nicholas, and Jean heard Dudian's words. They couldn't help but look at the youth, although they would ignore it if they were in Dudian's position. But they still felt a chill when they heard the calm and ruthless words from the youth's mouth. Dean's eyes flashed as he looked at the girl's slightly trembling fist. But it's not that difficult to control the war. Huh? Sergei, Nicholas, and Jean were surprised as they looked at Dudian. This was a race war that would decide the life and death of civilians in 3 regions. Even the 6 consortiums were just small characters in this war. How could Dudian have a way to deal with it? Gwyneth's body trembled as she looked at Dean. Her eyes were filled with pain and expectation. Dean slowly said, I can't control the military's attack, but I have some ways to influence the barbarians' attack. However, according to the current situation, the barbarians aren't stupid. They know that attacking the residential area is just a target for arrows. So they occupy the Red Maple Mountains and wait for the reinforcements to come. Then they will take the opportunity to loot the small towns and the suburbs. This is inevitable. Gwyneth's eyes were full of disappointment. So no matter who wins or loses, those people will die? Dean shrugged. There is no such thing as must die in my dictionary. The barbarians can loot the small towns. We just need to move the residents of the small towns to the residential area before the barbarians. Then we will be able to shelter them. But the process is quite troublesome and will take up a lot of my time. But your time can save the lives of countless people. Gwyneth couldn't help but be excited. Dean smiled. You are wrong. It isn't my time, but anyone's time can save the lives of countless people. It's just that they are willing or not. Obviously, no one is willing to do such a troublesome thing. Isn't it comfortable to have afternoon tea at home? Gwyneth stared at him. Her face was ugly as she bit her teeth. Dean saw her expression and smiled. You don't have to hate me. Since you want to save them, even if I stop you, you will secretly follow them. Even if I tie you up at home, you may not be loyal to me in the future. So, this time I will save them as you wish. Gwyneth's eyes widened. Are you really willing? Dean said, I can give them a chance to be redeemed. But whether they can survive or not depends on you. I will give you my letter and send a letter to the New World Consortium. They will communicate with the city defense and open a green channel to let the people from the small towns in. As for you and Sergei, you're responsible for going to the small towns and spread the news. Bring the noble emblem of the Ryan family and gather them. There was a trace of surprise in Gwyneth's eyes. She wanted to say something, but soon restrained herself. She took a deep breath and said, Thank you. Dean smiled and looked at Nicholas, pen and letter. Nicholas immediately called for a maid and had her pen, ink, and letter prepared. Dean quickly wrote 2 letters and gave them to Gwyneth. Send them to the Ryan family. Patriarch Feline will know what to do. Thank you. Gwyneth thanked him again and left. Sergei sighed helplessly. I haven't had enough of being a villain. This time, I have to join the rescue operation. How unlucky. Although he said that, he still lifted his body and followed Sergei. Nicholas whispered to Dean after the two left. Master, they're going to evacuate the people from the small towns. It is a race against time. If you borrow the emblem of a big aristocrat, you have a good relationship with you, then it will be more prestigious. The Ryan family used to be a top aristocrat a few decades ago, but it has been declining for decades. After 2 generations of decline, their reputation has long been thin. I'm afraid that the people in the small towns won't know about them. There will inevitably be resistance and riots. I'm afraid that it will affect the efficiency of the rescue. Dean indifferently smiled. It's their business how much they can save. But it's our business who should be thanked after they are rescued. Do you want me to contribute and come up with ideas, but in the end it will be someone else who will be thanked? Nicotine was startled for a moment, his expression changing slightly as he hurriedly lowered his head. Young master is right. Dean looked at him. Nicholas felt Dean's gaze, but didn't dare to look up. He felt the hairs on his body stand up. It was like a prey being stared at by a crocodile. His muscles were slightly stiff as he maintained a humble posture. After a moment, he heard Dean's dull voice. This time we're going to hunt monsters outside the giant wall. You should keep up. Nicholas's heart shrank as he looked up at Dean. There seemed to be a kind of irresistible majesty in Dean's eyes. His face slightly changed. He almost forgot the words that were on the tip of his tongue. Fortunately, he had been a butler for many years. He hurriedly said, Master, I can't stand going outside the giant wall. Although I took the risk to take God's blessing, and my physique is barely comparable to an intermediate hunter, but I don't know anything about fighting. Moreover, I'm old and my endurance won't be able to keep up. If I go outside the giant wall, I will only drag you down. If I accidentally disturb the monsters and bring trouble to you, it will bring you suffering. I know that I made a mistake last time, but I have changed. Now I'm loyal to you wholeheartedly. I hope you can give me another chance. Dean slowly said, My words are like a burning fire. Only the ashes are allowed to stay. Nicholas's face turned ugly as he looked at Dean's deep eyes. He didn't dare to beg again. He kept sighing. His mind was searching for information about the outside of the giant wall. He was thinking about what to do in case of various situations. After a moment, Jean moved all the materials onto the mammoth carriage. Dean checked and confirmed that there were no mistakes. He went back to the hall and put on his hunter's armor. This was the latest model developed by the temple. They added the new material plastic. The gloves and joints were connected by a tough, soft glue. It was more flexible and lighter. There was a thin layer of special refined glue on the chest and back that was vulnerable to attack. However, although this hunter's armor was more advanced than the previous one, but it would still be difficult to resist monsters that were around level 20. The industrial level of the armor was far from the level that the monsters outside the giant wall had been evolving for more than 300 years. Nicholas also put on the new hunter's armor that Dean had prepared for him. Dean told Jean to look after the house. He called Nicholas to sit with him in the carriage. The mammoth carriage followed the desolate road that was specially used for beast carriages and arrived outside the living area. After entering the suburbs, it headed straight for a stronghold. The area of the suburbs was very large. It was very far from the Red Maple Mountains, so there was no need to worry about the barbarians from the Red Maple Mountains. After a few hours, the mammoth carriage arrived at the fortress. Nicholas jumped out of the carriage and took out a medal from the soldier who intercepted him. It was the silver Eagle Hunter medal. It represented the identity of an intermediate hunter. The soldier looked at it, then looked at the nicotine and said, What's inside? Open it for me to check. Nicotine's face was cold as he said, These are all my hunting tools. What is there to check? Do you think it is? Is there something fishy going on here? The soldier said with an unfriendly expression. Nicholas sneered and took out another medal. I'm a hunter of the New World Consortium. I was specifically ordered by architect Dean to go outside the giant wall to hunt. Do you really want to stop me? The soldier was shocked when he saw the medal in his hand. This is Mr. Dean's medal. Although he was just a fortress guard, but at least he could recognize the symbols of the superior. This medal belonged to a senior architect, without a doubt. There was the word Dean on the back. He didn't need to think about it to know that it belonged to the genius architect who had been in the limelight recently. Nicholas coldly said, How can this be fake? The soldier quickly retracted his hand and smiled. I didn't expect you to be architect, Dean's man. Do you need me to help you unload these things? No, these things are too heavy. I will directly use the carriage to drag them. Nicholas indifferently said. The soldier said, This carriage is easy to be attacked by mutant beasts outside the fortress. What mutant beast can attack it with me here? Nicholas glanced at him and jumped into the carriage. I'm in a hurry. Hurry up. The soldier smiled and ran back to the fortress gate. He waved to his companion to open the gate. The mammoth carriage left the fortress under the eyes of everyone. Dean jumped out from the back of the carriage after more than 10 miles. He waved to Nicholas. Nicholas understood and hurriedly crawled to his side, putting on a smile and returning the 2 medals with both hands. Dean put it into his armor and let the coachman of the carriage go straight. The carriage had been bought by him. Even if it was sacrificed in the radiation zone outside the fortress, it didn't matter. As for the coachman, he would be sent to the underworld outside the giant wall. He didn't want the matter to be leaked to the ears of other consortiums if he was questioned by the courier station. The mammoth carriage was huge. It attracted the attention of mutant beasts after entering the radiation zone. Dudian sat on the head of the mammoth and let nicotine kill it. With his physique as an intermediate hunter, it was easy for him to kill a few mutant beasts. But not all of these mutant beasts were small characters. There were many senior hunters who went out but disappeared in the radiation zone and were judged to be dead. It could be seen that there were some terrible mutant beasts, but the number was very small. It would only happen once in decades. If he encountered it, he could only blame his bad luck. Chapter 325. Dudian's eyes lit up as he thought of something. He jumped down from the mammoth's head as the carriage approached. He looked at the 2 Knights of Light. What are you doing? One of the middle-aged Knights of Light didn't answer Dean's words. He looked up and down at Dean. He frowned. Are you hunters from the New World Consortium? Yes. There have been frequent anomalies in the passage outside the giant wall. There are traces of giant monster activity outside. Are you going out to hunt? I advise you to go back so that you won't be treated as a free meal by the giant monsters outside the passage. The middle-aged Knight of Light indifferently said. Dean smiled. Thank you for reminding us. But we are under the orders of the consortium. We can't make our own decisions. Humph. The middle-aged Knight of Light snorted. If you insist on going out, then don't blame me for not warning you if you lose your life. Dean was used to the sarcastic words of the Knight of Light. He smiled. Then I will trouble you to help me open the passage. Courting death. A young knight muttered in displeasure, although his voice was a bit low, but it was obvious that everyone present could hear him. The other Knights of Light looked at Dean and Nicotine with a bit of disdain and ridicule in their eyes. A thin youth who was standing in the back stared at Dean suspiciously. He couldn't help but exclaim, Are you Architect Dean? Dean nodded. Yes, it's me. The middle-aged knight, the young knight, and the others looked at Dean in amazement. They didn't expect that the famous genius would be standing in front of them. Although they were familiar with Dean's name, but they didn't have much free time to read newspapers. Therefore, they didn't recognize Dean's appearance. Dean didn't want to delay here for too long. He took out his architect's medal and hunter's medal and showed them to the middle-aged knight. I'm here to escort our consortium's hunters to establish a stronghold outside the giant wall. I'll have to trouble you to open the way. The middle-aged knight politely said, I've heard that Architect Dean has a good relationship with the New World Consortium. I didn't expect you to be responsible for establishing a stronghold for their hunters. You are really versatile. Dean knew that the middle-aged knight didn't know much about him. The temple had deliberately covered up his identity as a hunter. At the same time, he rarely appeared in noble gatherings and didn't stir up any big movements. He glanced at the middle-aged knight. You are a member of the Char family. Give my regards to your family head. The middle-aged knight's eyes lit up. I didn't expect you to have heard of my family. It's an honor. You're too polite. Dean looked back at the mammoth carriage and said to Nicholas, Get ready to unload the goods. Nicholas was secretly surprised as he saw the conversation between Dean and the middle-aged knight. He had never seen the arrogant Knights of Light being so polite and humble to others. He nodded and turned to leave. The middle-aged knight looked at Dean and ordered the Knights of Light to open the passage door. Architect Dean, this passage isn't safe. You have a distinguished body, so let the hunter do the rough work. We can't afford the responsibility if anything happens to you. Dean patted his shoulder. Don't worry. I'll be back soon. The middle-aged knight smiled. He wanted to continue to persuade Dean, but Dean raised his hand to stop him. The middle-aged knight sighed and waved to the Knights of Light to assist Nicholas in unloading the goods. The shark spears rolled in coarse cloth were lifted one by one. The heavy weight made the Knights of Light speechless. They were full of curiosity, but didn't dare to peek because Dean was standing next to them. Soon all the things were unloaded from the carriage. Dean asked Nicotine to move to the passage. After everything was piled up in the passage, he said goodbye to the middle-aged knight and entered the passage. He closed the heavy passage door. Under the dim light of the oil lamps in the tunnel, the rock walls on both sides of the tunnel were engraved with magnificent war pictures of humans and monsters. They looked slightly ferocious in the dark and overlapping light. In the middle of the tunnel, there were two beautiful and graceful goddesses who were staring at the people under the wall with smiles on their faces. Nicholas was full of curiosity as he came to the giant wall passage for the first time. Dean urged him. Both of them moved the shark spear to the exit on the other side of the passage. Dean took off the lock and sniffed along the gap. The air was filled with a very faint smell. It was mixed with the smell of Splitter. His eyes narrowed. Splitter really came here. Judging from the concentration of the smell, the latter shouldn't be here at the moment. Dean slowly opened the giant door. A narrow sky came into view. He looked around and saw a few huge dents on the ground. He recognized that they were the footprints of Splitter. Dean's muscles slightly tightened as he looked around. Once he left the door, he would be completely isolated from the safe environment. Once Splitter sensed him, then there would be no possibility of survival. The magic marks of Splitter were very strong and had a wide range of smell. Dean quietly sniffed for 10 minutes. He saw that there was no movement, so he opened the giant door. He waved to Nicholas to move the shark's spears to the ground outside. His eyes were always vigilant while moving the spears. If Splitter suddenly appeared, then he would immediately drill into the passage to escape. The size of the passage was too small for Splitter to squeeze in. Nicholas looked around while moving the shark spears. In his more than 60 years of life, he had heard of the outside world countless times, but he had never seen it with his own eyes. Although he was different from some of the boys and girls who had hope of exploring the outside world, but his heart was full of curiosity. At the moment, he had the opportunity to see it with his own eyes. He could vaguely see a desolate ruin. Weeds were growing everywhere. It seemed that someone had lived here. Shocked, he turned his head and looked around. Suddenly, his pupils shrank, and he almost screamed. After holding back his uncontrollable scream, he hurriedly pulled Dean and pointed to the entrance behind them. Dean looked back, and his face suddenly changed. On the towering wall behind the passageway, there were more than a dozen scratches that were several inches deep, crisscrossing each other. Each scratch was more than 10 meters long, some even more than 20 meters long. It was not hard to imagine what kind of giant creature had caused this damage. Dean took a deep breath. He was shocked by the destructive power of Splitter. He was shocked by the hardness of the giant wall. No wonder it was able to shelter humans for 300 years. It had been more than 300 years since he had awakened, but the giant wall was still intact. He had never heard the news that the giant wall had been damaged. Nicotine's shock was hard to conceal. He had heard countless stories about monsters, but he never thought that there would be such a terrible thing. He couldn't imagine the monster that had caused such long scratches. What kind of shape did it have? Dean gently put the shark spear on the ground and came to the front of the giant wall. He looked up at the lowest sharp mark. From the groove of the sharp mark, he could see the rough stone particles. The giant wall seemed to be made of stone. There was nothing special about it. But how could a giant wall made of sand and stone have such a high defensive strength? How could it withstand the attack of the monster for more than 300 years? Chapter 3:26. It's not ordinary sand and stones. Dean's eyes lit up as he used the dagger to scratch the giant wall in front of him, but he could only scratch out some fine sand and moss. He suspected that the sand was just dust over the years. Dean looked up at the scratches. He didn't continue to study the giant wall. With the current level of craftsmanship, he couldn't identify the composition of the giant wall from the basic structure. He turned back to the passage and said to Nicotine, "Don't just stand there. Continue to move everything out." Nicotine's face turned ugly as he looked at Dean. "Master, are you going to hunt for this big guy?" Dudian nodded. "Correct." Nicotine felt as if he had eaten a poisonous mushroom. His face turned green. "Master, I know that I offended you before. I admit my mistake. If you want to kill me, it's better to stab me directly. I won't resist. Asking me to be cannon fodder is really... Don't talk if you don't want to die." Dean kicked his butt. He didn't treat him as an old man in his 60s. "Hurry up." Nicotine jumped into the passage and looked back at Dean. He wanted to pull down the giant door and run away, but the idea lingered in his mind. He sighed and lifted the shark lance from the ground to Dean. Both of them cooperated and moved all the tools out of the passage. Dean crawled on the ground and listened to the nearby movements. He was relieved when he didn't hear any vibration. He said to Nicotine, "You wait for me here. If you hear any movement, then get into the passage to take refuge. Don't try to escape, or you will die miserably." Nicotine's heart was pounding as he nervously asked, "What about you?" Dean took out two large bowl-shaped objects from one of the bags. These were suckers that he had made himself. There were 4 of them in the bag. He took 2 and tied the other 2 to his back with a rope. He put on a small backpack and attached it to his back. Then he put on another huge bag with a strong rope. He came to the front of the giant wall and pressed the suckers on it. Soon the suckers were firmly hooked to the giant wall. He used the suckers to climb up. Nicotine was stunned. He almost suspected that there was a problem with his eyes. Climbing up the wall with bare hands? What was that thing that could be attached to the wall? Dean used the spider's sucker to climb quickly. If this thing was given to the temple, then it would be rated as a 2-star item. But at this moment, the value of this thing wasn't something a 2-star item could replace. There was a groove on the sucker. As long as the groove was pressed, the sucker would automatically fall off from the wall so that he could climb up at a faster speed. In the blink of an eye, Dean climbed to a height of hundreds of meters. He maintained a relatively safe high speed, not daring to climb at full speed, lest he accidentally fell from the wall. If he fell from this height of 100 meters, his bones would be fractured. Not to mention the height of the giant wall was more than 100 meters. Just the visual estimation of the ground was more than 1,000 meters. If he fell halfway, he would die. Although he had considered using an air cushion, but if he fell from a height of 400 or 500 meters, then even an air cushion wouldn't be able to save his life. He had to rely on the suckers in his hands. Therefore, these 4 suckers were the result of repeated experiments. He had put a lot of effort in the aspect of abrasion resistance. In theory, it was possible to continuously climb a distance of thousands of meters. If I wasn't worried that the splitter would make too much noise, I would have directly made a hot air balloon with a jet gun. Then I would be able to easily fly up the giant wall. But there are still risks. The pressure of the hot air balloon at a height of 700 or 800 meters is too much for the current materials. Once it breaks, I would die faster. On the ground, Nicholas looked up at the figure flying away from the giant wall. He was completely shocked. With only 2 small tools, he was able to climb to such a terrifying height with his bare hands. It was simply unheard of. After a moment, Dean had climbed to a height of more than 400 meters. His right hand was sore and swollen. He estimated that his left hand was almost the same. Both of his hands grasped the suckers and slightly gasped for breath. He continued to climb up. Each time he would stick the suckers to the giant wall so as not to fall off. Nevertheless, when he climbed to 600 meters, Dean's left hand loosened and the suckers fell off. He was scared to death. Cold sweat instantly permeated his body. He quickly controlled the strength of his right hand and stabilized it on the wall. Once again, he waved his left hand to slap the suckers on the wall. After this frightening moment, Dean paid more attention to the suckers on his left hand. He didn't look up to see how high it was. He just kept climbing up. He didn't know how long it took. Suddenly, he felt the light above his head was much brighter. He looked up and saw the sky close to him. The top of the giant wall was only dozens of meters away from him. He was excited. He stabilized the rhythm of his hands and feet and continued to climb up. Soon he finally came to the top of the giant wall. He raised his hand to grab the edge and climbed up. He looked around and found that the top of the giant wall was a bit similar to the Great Wall of his motherland. There were slightly raised edges on both sides. In the middle was a wide aisle of more than 20 meters. There were no weapons on it. It was very clean. Dean exhaled and looked up at the front. He suddenly had a feeling of overlooking all living beings. He opened his arms and felt the cold wind blowing on his face. His hair was curled back. He felt comfortable and comfortable. After experiencing the feeling of standing on the top of the giant wall for a while, Dean looked down at Nicotine. The distance of more than a kilometer was still clearly visible to him. He could even see Nicotine's beard. He smiled and unloaded the big bag he was carrying. There was a circle of finger-thick rope inside. He untied it and wrapped one end around a boulder on the edge of the giant wall. The other end was thrown down. The length of the rope was 1,200 meters. He calculated it according to the height of the giant wall. In order to avoid visual errors, he added more than 100 meters in length. Soon, the rope fell to the ground at Nicotine's feet. Nicotine looked up at Dean, who was overlooking from the top of the giant wall. The shock on his face was still difficult to calm down. He took a deep breath and picked up another huge bag on the ground. He tied it with the rope and stepped back a few steps. Dean saw him tied it and immediately pulled the rope. After a moment, the huge bag was lifted up. He untied the bag. There was still a rope inside, but it was not the previous lighter rope. Instead, it was a thick rope as thick as a wrist. It was extremely heavy. According to the law, Dean untied the thick rope. The thin rope was useless, so he threw it on the ground. After the thick rope was put down, Nicotine immediately bent the rope into a triangle shape and tied the shark spear to it. After he tied it, Dean pulled it up. After a moment, the first shark spear was pulled to the top of the giant wall, then the second one, the third one. After all 12 shark spears were moved to the top of the giant wall, the next step was to launch the super cannon. The super cannon was not assembled. It was wrapped in a coarse cloth. The rope was tied to the cloth. It was lifted to the top of the giant wall. Then the coarse cloth and the thick rope were thrown down together. The other small parts were also put into the cloth and lifted to the giant wall. As time passed, all the tools that were brought were carried to the giant wall. Dean threw down the thick rope. He was gasping for breath while looking at the distant wilderness. Suddenly, he saw a black dot coming from the distance. It was like an ant running at full speed. He squinted his eyes and looked at it. The ladder was running closer, and he could see its appearance. It's it. Dean's pupils shrank. He didn't expect that it would appear before he could use the splitter's plasma shell to lure it. Chapter 3:27. The shadow that was rapidly approaching was Splitter. Dean looked down from the sky. For the first time, he saw the appearance of Splitter. It was like seaweed that was crawling at high speed. It had side-like arms. Its physique was different from Splitter. There were several strange dark parts on its body. There were many sharp blades hidden in the carapace. It was like a machine that was born for war. Dean didn't have time to look at Splitter. He shouted to Nicholas, "Come up, it's coming." Fearing that the Knights of Light on the other side of the wall would hear his shout, he lowered his voice a bit. Although Nicholas was old, his physique was that of an intermediate hunter. His hearing was much better than that of an ordinary Knight of Light. Before Dean's roar, he was aware of the abnormality from the change in Dean's face. When he heard Dean's roar, he immediately grabbed the rope and wrapped it around his waist. His heart was pounding. He looked back and saw the last bag on the ground. He gritted his teeth and ran over to pick it up. The moment he picked it up, his body jerked up. It was Dean who was struggling to pull the rope. Dean pulled with all his strength. Nicotine was quickly pulled up. His speed was faster than an elevator. He looked up and found that Splitter was more than 10 miles away. This short distance was a long distance for ordinary people, but with Splitter's terrifying speed, it would only take a few breaths to reach the distance. He didn't care about the soreness in his right arm. He gritted his teeth and pulled at full speed. Soon, Nicotine was pulled to a height of more than 100 meters. For the general land monsters, this height was absolutely safe. But for Splitter, who was more than 30 meters in height, it only needed a slight jump to reach him. Boom! Boom! The ground shook violently. In the blink of an eye, Splitter arrived in front of the giant wall. Its speed quickly decreased. Apparently, it realized that it would cause a lot of damage if it hit the giant wall. Dean looked down from the sky. He could clearly see the core position of Splitter's body. There were several black, triangular armors. There was a huge eyeball inlaid in it. The eyeball was full of eyeballs. Obviously, this was one of its weaknesses. However, judging from the few pieces of black, triangular armor around the eyeball, it should be similar to the function of eyelids to protect the eyeball. In other words, even if the eyeball was shot from a high altitude, the arrow might not be able to penetrate the black triangular armor. Hearing the sound of the ground trembling, Nicotine felt as if his heart had stopped beating. He felt a suffocating sense of fear as he tightly held onto the rope. When he saw the giant monster rushing towards him, his mind went blank. Although he had imagined it countless times, seeing it with his own eyes still shocked him. This was a monster? Is this the thing used to fight the hunters? The moment Splitter's body slammed into the wall, it quickly came to a stop. The eyeball in the middle of its back quickly noticed Nicotine, who was still hanging in the air. It let out a low roar and fiercely jumped up. Seeing its body dilate in its pupils, Nicotine was scared out of his wits, his eyes wide with terror. Whoosh! A huge side-like arm quickly chopped down like a giant sword. No! Nicotine looked at Splitter, who was jumping high up in the air. The two of them were almost parallel to each other, so he instantly saw the terrifying posture of his opponent. An unprecedented fear gripped his heart tightly, and he screamed. He instinctively wanted to let go of the rope and let his body fall down. He didn't even have time to think about whether he would fall to his death or not. He only hoped that he could avoid the attack in front of him. However, he had wrapped the rope around his waist too tightly, so he couldn't untie it. Whoosh! At this moment, the rope was swung in vain. Bang! The side-like arm brushed past Nicholas's eyes, and the strong wind it brought about hurt his eyeballs. Then, a loud sound came from the giant wall behind him, but the scythe-like arm had struck the giant wall. Nicholas felt as if he were floating in the air. He swayed to the other side and narrowly avoided the blow. Boom! The next moment, a huge roar echoed from below. It was the sound of Splitter falling down again. The ground caved in. Nicotine was relieved. He looked down and saw that Dudian was about to jump again. His face turned pale with fright. He quickly bit the bundle and used both hands to climb the rope. In just a few seconds, Nicotine had risen more than 100 meters. His arms were alternately pulling the rope, and in just a few seconds, Nicotine had risen more than 100 meters. Whoosh! The Splitter jumped again. Nicotine's heart jumped as he saw the momentum of the Splitter's jump. He hurriedly stamped his feet on the giant wall and used the momentum to move away. Dean, who was on top of the giant wall, was prepared. He ran to the other side and swung the Nicotine to the other side according to the previous method. Bang! Splitter's scythe hit the giant wall again. Dean was relieved and hurriedly pulled the scythe at full speed. When the Splitter jumped for the third time, Nicotine had already climbed to a height of more than 500 meters. This time, the Splitter only jumped to about 350 meters before falling down. Obviously, this was already the limit of its jumping. Although its jumping ability was very strong, its weight was also very huge. It was just like how an elephant's strength was the strongest in the forest, but it did not dare to jump. Nicotine was relieved as he saw that the Splitter couldn't touch him, but he still didn't dare to stay. He grabbed the rope and quickly climbed up. The Splitter stood under the giant wall. It seemed to look up, but didn't jump again. Dean was relieved as he saw the Splitter. Although the Splitter had wings, but but its body was too big. Its thin wings shouldn't be used for flying. It should be used to fight on land to make the body more flexible. Otherwise, the splitter would have used its wings to fly up the giant wall. After a moment, Nicotine was pulled up the giant wall. Nicotine grabbed the edge and sat on the ground. He was panting and sweating. His face was still pale. It was obvious that he was still in shock. Dean quickly took back the rope and kicked Nicotine. "Don't dawdle. Hurry up and move the things." Nicholas sat on the ground and turned to look at Dudian. He saw that Dudian's left hand was torn by the friction of the rope. Blood was sliding down his index finger, but he didn't feel it. Nicholas's anger dissipated, but there was a complex look in his eyes. He stood up and said, "Thank you." Dean glanced at him. "Don't flatter yourself. I was afraid that the things in the bag would fall." Nicotine's mouth slightly twitched as he secretly smiled. He didn't say much as he carried the bag to the shark lance that was 100 meters away. He picked up the shark lance and said to Dean, "This guy is right below us. We can directly launch from here. Where else do we need to move it?" Dean said, "This is the entrance of the passage. If the movement is too big, then the Knights of Light will be alarmed." Nicotine choked and said honestly, "Then where do you think we should move to?" "Over there, 5 kilometers away." Dean pointed to the left. Nicotine smiled. He knew that there was no room for discussion. He picked up the shark lance and walked towards the direction. Dean held the shark lance and walked towards the giant wall. He looked down and saw that Splitter was standing in front of the giant wall. It was waving its scythe at the giant wall and making rustling sounds. He retracted his eyes and moved forward. More than 10 minutes later, all the tools, including the shark spear, were moved to a place 5,000 meters away from the left side of the tunnel. Chapter 328. Roar. A low roar came from under the giant wall. Splitter's plasma powder fell to a height of about 600 or 700 meters. Splitter roared as if it had sensed something. It turned around and ran towards Dean's position. The ground rumbled and trembled. The footprints of the Splitter were left along the way. In less than half a minute, the Splitter rushed to the bottom of the giant wall. It looked up at the blood powder bag tied to the rope. It roared in anger. Even though the Splitter knew that it couldn't climb up, its voice was sharp and vigorous. Even though the Splitter knew that it couldn't climb up, it still made people's heartbeat fluctuate and pores shrink. Dean firmly grabbed the rope and descended vertically. According to the height shown by the previous Nicotine jump, he hung the rope to a height of about 400 meters. He gently shook the rope to let the smell of the plasma powder spread out. At the same time, he deliberately tempted the Nicotine. Splitter roared and leaped into the air. Dean immediately pulled the rope and threw it up to a height of 70 or 80 meters. Splitter jumped to a height of nearly 400 meters, but it still couldn't touch the rope. Dean stabilized the rope and slowly lowered it. At the same time, the thin wings on Splitter's back spread out, reducing the force of the fall. At the same time, the scythe slashed on the wall, using the friction to reduce the speed of its body's descent. Even so, when it landed, it still let out a loud sound like an earthquake. Dean grabbed the rope and continued to move to the left. He didn't want to be heard by the Knights of Light. Splitter ran after the rope and suddenly jumped up. Dean pulled the rope again and threw it high into the sky. The rope head suddenly rose dozens of meters, making it fall into the air. "Young master, how do we do this?" Nicholas was assembling the super launch cannon, holding a huge pedestal in his hands as he hurriedly asked. Dean looked at it and said, "There are 2 20-centimeter long iron bolts next to it. Connect it to the ground and tighten the screws. Don't let it get loose." Nicotine heard Dean's words and immediately got busy. Dean stopped and grabbed the rope to continue to lure Splitter. Splitter repeatedly jumped a few times. He saw Dean put down the rope again. He looked up and roared a few times in anger, but he didn't try to jump again. Apparently, he realized that it was futile. Dean lowered the rope by dozens of meters and kept shaking. Splitter couldn't hold back as it saw the shaking rope. It jumped higher this time. Dean was surprised. He hurriedly threw the rope to the side. As the rope was raised, it swung sideways and shifted its direction. Splitter suddenly missed its target. The wings on its back spread wide, and its side-like arms rapidly chopped at the huge wall to reduce its falling speed. It let out a low squeak and landed on the ground with a loud bang. The ground shook violently, and its body also flipped backwards. It swayed on the ground for a while, and then slowly got up. Green liquid seeped out from the joints of its legs, which were as sharp as a spider's legs. Seeing this, Dean immediately knew that it was injured. There was a touch of smile on his face. Being able to injure a legendary monster with a hunting level of 68, it was estimated that it could scare a lot of hunters. Dean continued to use the plasma powder on the rope to lure it and consume its physical energy. Splitter looked up and roared in a low voice. However, he did not continue to jump. Dean slowly lowered the rope from 300 meters to 200 meters. Once again, the Splitter became angry and pounced on him. He pulled with all his might, but this time he was unable to dodge Splitter's scythe. Splitter's scythe slashed onto the thin rope, and it was immediately cut in half. Dean took back the rope and poured out a small cluster of blood powder. He wrapped it in a piece of white gauze and tied it to the rope as bait. Splitter pounced on the broken rope as it landed on the ground. After a moment, it looked up at Dean and roared. Its voice was sharp, full of anger and killing intent. Dean smiled and threw the rope to about 300 meters. He continued to lure Splitter. Splitter didn't jump again. Dean didn't continue to fall. Both of them consumed each other. After a moment, Nicotine finally finished assembling the cannon. Dean called Nicotine, use this to tease it, lead it to attack, and consume its strength. Nicotine was stunned. He stretched his neck and looked at the ground. He saw Splitter roaring on the ground. Its body was covered with sharp blades. Nicotine retracted his head and looked at Dean. Will this work? Just do as I say. Dean handed the rope to it and went to the front of the super battery. He pushed the battery to the edge of the giant wall. The edge was only half the height of a person. The base of the battery was 30 centimeters high. There were 8 lifting tubes on the base, which were 2 meters long. It was easy to push the barrel to the edge of the giant wall. The barrel could be adjusted 270 degrees so that the base was close to the edge so that the barrel could aim vertically at the bottom of the giant wall. Dean picked up a shark spear. The body of the shark spear was tungsten steel, but the tip was dark black. In addition, the shark spear was different from the ones he had smelted. There was a small metal cylinder fixed behind the shark fin on the back of the spear. At this moment, he inserted the shark spear into the barrel, covered the muzzle with the soft rubber net that he had prepared beforehand, and adjusted the barrel to a straight downward angle. The tip of the shark spear slowly slid out of the soft rubber net, causing it to bulge slightly, but it didn't break. Dean opened the barrel and aimed at the Splitter. He took out a match and was ready to ignite the fuse. He didn't act, but whispered to Nicotine, lure it to jump. Lower the rope, but not too low. Nicotine had seen the scene of the cannon firing the shark spear last time. He understood Dean's intention. Nicotine's eyes lit up as he controlled the rope to lower it. He kept swaying the rope to provoke Splitter. When the rope was lowered to 250 meters, Splitter seemed to be unable to endure Nicotine's continuous lashing and swinging. It jumped once again. Good opportunity. Dean was happy when he saw the Splitter was ready to jump. He had some understanding of the jumping posture of the Splitter. He immediately ignited the primer behind the barrel with a match. The fuse of the primer quickly burned into the barrel. Dean tightly held the handles on both sides of the barrel to prevent the impact from changing the position of the barrel. This kind of non-fixed barrel was more likely to be affected by the impact of the firepower and would deviate. Whoosh! Splitter jumped. Bang! The muzzle spurted out a flame. Crash! At the same time, the sound of chains suddenly rang out. The tungsten steel shark spear broke through the soft rubber net in a flash and flew straight down. The chain and the round metal base behind the shark spear that was caught by the net were instantly blown out. The huge momentum pushed the tungsten steel shark spear forward at high speed. At the same time, the momentum also tore the rope net that was holding the chain. Before the chain could scatter, it was pulled by the shark spear and pulled into a jet black line. At the same time, the small metal cylinder tied to the back of Shark Lance. Under the strong pressure, a small hidden buckle at the front of the cylinder suddenly popped up, and the end of the cylinder fiercely spewed out a huge white wave of air. Steam jet. This was the run-up device that Dean thought of. If it was shot on the ground, it could make the shark spear fly for at least 50 meters. At this moment, with the help of gravity, the speed of Shark Lance's descent was extremely fast. With the help of the steam jet, it was like a black shark shadow, sticking close to the giant wall as it swam downwards. In an instant, it had crossed over 1,000 meters of the giant wall. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. At the moment, Splitter had just cut the rope and was falling down. Whoosh! The tungsten steel shark spear whistled towards the shark spear. Splitter shrieked in the air, as if he had felt the coldness of Shark Spear's attack. He raised his scythe-like arms in front of his body, while the other 4 scythe-like arms were slightly spread out, as if he was going to attack Shark Spear head-on. The moment the two collided, Splitter's 4 scythe-like arms fiercely chopped down with the force of 10,000 caddies. However, the weight of the Shark Spear, the momentum of the full-speed launch, and the power of the steam jet had long since reached an extremely frightening level. The destructive power it carried was far beyond Splitter's expectations. Puff! The scythe-like arms were shaken off. The tungsten steel shark spear instantly pierced through the scythe-like arms in front of its body. Its falling body was unable to adjust its falling posture. It fiercely smashed to the ground. Dean's calm expression revealed a pleasant surprise. He didn't expect that his first attack would be successful. He didn't check the injuries of Splitter. He quickly loaded the second shark spear. The whole action took less than 3 seconds. He had carried the second shark spear to the side when he had launched the first one. It was convenient to load the second shark spear. He rubbed the match and ignited the ignition. He grabbed the barrel and aimed at Splitter. Chapter 329. Boom! A deafening blast rang out. A black shark's shadow swept out from the muzzle of the cannon. The chain was pulled into a straight line in the air as it rushed out furiously. Dean only felt a slight buzzing in his ears. His oversensitive sense of smell suddenly smelled a pungent smell of gunpowder, which made him frown slightly. His eyes were fixed on the black, giant shadow that was moving quickly on the giant wall. His heart was tightly raised. The speed of the tungsten steel shark spear was very fast. In just 2 seconds, it had covered a distance of more than 500 meters. If it was shot horizontally on the ground, then the speed would sharply decrease after the initial range. But at this moment, the shark spear was flying faster and faster with the help of its weight and the steam nozzle. It was almost close to the speed of sound. It must be known that the speed of an ordinary pistol bullet was around 400 meters per second. But at this moment, Dean was able to make a giant weapon like the shark spear to reach a speed close to the speed of sound. Moreover, the destructive power of the shark spear was far more than 100 times better than a normal bullet. Roar! When the shark spear flew halfway to the giant wall, Splitter on the ground seemed to have sensed it. It roared angrily and struggled to get up. However, the momentum of the shark spear and its own weight had caused it to be seriously injured. 2 or 3 of its sickle arms were bent, sputtering out green liquid. The tail end of the thin wings on its back was folded like a transparent metal plate, which couldn't be kept inside the carapace that protected its wings. Just when it got up, the shark's spear flew over its head. Puff! The sharp shark spear instantly pierced through the edge of the Splitter's body. The Splitter quickly retreated, but it was still hit. It roared in pain like the roar of a tiger or a dragon. Dean didn't look at the result, as he quickly picked up the third shark spear. At the same time, he ordered Nicholas to move the fourth shark spear. Dean immediately adjusted the muzzle after loading the third shark lance into the barrel. He aimed at the Splitter under the giant wall. He knew that he had hit the target the moment he heard its painful roar. He saw that the shark lance was nailed in front of the Splitter's body. The tail of a shark lance was 6 or 7 meters high. The chain at the tail of the shark lance had fallen to the ground. The tail of the shark lance was automatically connected with the tail of the previous shark lance. It was tightly wrapped around the splitter's body. This naturally wasn't a coincidence, but a suction force. In the past few days, Dean had been pondering over the whole plan to hunt Splitter. He had been deliberating step by step. He had played all the details to the extreme. The chain was one of them. He had added a section of magnet chain on top of the tungsten steel chain. At this moment, the two magnets were attracted to each other and twisted around the Splitter's body. Originally, with the size of Splitter, it would be very difficult for the magnetic strength of the two chains at the tail end of the shark's spear to gather together. So Dean's assumption was that after hitting 6 or 7 chains, the probability of the magnets attracting each other would be much higher. But he didn't expect that the second chain of the shark's spear would entangle each other. God is helping me. You won't be able to escape today. Dean's eyes were full of fighting spirit. He adjusted the muzzle and ignited the third shark spear. Boom! The muzzle spat out flames as the shark's spear shot out. Dean's ears were somewhat deafened. His hearing was blurred. He felt that the handle of the gun was boiling hot, although the barrel had been smelted and was more heat-resistant. But he didn't expect that the third shark spear would be scalding hot. He estimated that he could only fire 4 times in a row. Otherwise, the barrel would explode and he would be hurt. On the ground, Splitter angrily roared. It brandished its scythe and chopped at the tungsten steel chain. Only a ding-ding sound could be heard. The tungsten steel chain was actually dented by the scythe's sharp blade. If the scythe's strength was a little stronger, it could have directly broken the tungsten steel chain. In reality, if it was a tungsten steel plate of the same thickness, the Splitter would definitely be able to cut through it. However, the chain was a flexible weapon. When it received an attack, it would disperse the force to all parts of the body. In addition, the two magnets had pulled the chain quite a bit when it received an attack. That was why the chain was not cut in half. Splitter let out a few low growls. It seemed to be a little irritated. It crawled up from the ground. This time, it seemed to have noticed the attack above its head. When Shark Lance flew to a height of 700 meters, its body had already rolled to the side. It crawled to the other side and ran towards the wilderness ruins in the distance. Bang! The third shark spear struck the ground and penetrated the soil, completely submerging into it. The chain at the end of the spear was dragged more than 10 meters into the ground, which showed how powerful its momentum was. Dean slightly frowned as he took the fourth shark lance. He touched the steam nozzle on the back of the lance and quickly loaded it. He aimed at the direction where the Splitter was running. In a short period of 0.5 seconds, he forcibly predicted the Splitter's position and ignited the ignition. Both of his hands held the hot barrel handle as he adjusted the angle and aimed at the Splitter in a diagonal line. As a hunter, he was able to lock the target quickly. Boom! The shark lance suddenly popped out, and a hot wave of heat came from the barrel. Dean's right hand shrank as he tightly held the handle. He hurriedly loosened his left hand and didn't continue to load the shark lance. His eyes were fixed on the shark lance that was shot out. The black shark spear moved in a straight diagonal line. The steam nozzle was turned on by the momentum. It spat out white waves. It looked like a black shark was moving rapidly in the sea. Splitter's running speed was not very fast. The two shark spears had left deep wounds on its body, and the pain was unbearable as it ran. At the same time, the chains on the shark spears had wrapped around some of its scythe-like arms. It was as if a person's hands had been tied up. Splitter's sense of balance was greatly affected, and it was difficult for him to run at full speed. The Splitter was hiding in the depths of the grass. It suddenly sensed something and looked back. It saw the shark spear approaching at high speed. It was startled and hastily bounced sideways to avoid the shark spear's trajectory. After the previous attacks, its intelligence had determined that Splitter could only attack in a straight line. However, it had miscalculated this time. Just as it tried its best to jump to the side, the shark spear suddenly made a slight turn and chased after it. Splitter was so frightened that it started to flee in panic. However, the more it ran, the closer the shark spear got. If it had stopped on the spot, it would have been able to dodge the shark spear's attack and let the shark spear hit the ground in front of it. However, most land creatures had little experience in defending against attacks from the sky. Even Splitter was no exception. As a result, the faster it ran, the closer the shark's spear got. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. It was too fast for people to think and judge. Chapter 330. Dean was overjoyed as he saw this scene. He couldn't wait to load another shark spear to chase after the Splitter. But he calmly restrained himself. If he continued to fire, the barrel was likely to burst. Nicholas, who was next to the battery, looked at the Splitter thousands of meters away from the giant wall. His eyes were full of shock. He didn't expect that such a terrifying giant monster would be so embarrassed in front of this boy. Although he didn't know much about monsters, but he knew that such a giant monster's hunting level was absolutely extraordinary. Otherwise, people like Dean, who was close to a senior hunter's physique, wouldn't be so cumbersome to prepare a lot of items and carefully rely on such a natural terrain advantage to attack. What shocked him even more was that Dean had assembled such a terrifying weapon. Coupled with the tungsten steel spear, its destructive power was simply terrifying. He couldn't help but think that if such a weapon was installed on every fortress inside the giant wall, then how could the barbarians dare to invade? However, in addition to the weapon, what made him feel the most was Dean himself. He had never seen such a terrible person, not to mention that the latter was just a young boy. Previously, he clearly saw that when Dean was loading the shark spear, he deliberately adjusted the angle of the metal cylinder on the shark spear. At that time, he had some doubts. But when he saw the shark spear being shot, he realized that it was Dean's masterpiece. Insidious prediction and calculation. In just a few seconds, his perception of Dean had once again undergone earth-shaking changes. Before, he thought that Dean was a mature and talented architect. For this age, he was a rare character. But at this moment, no matter how he looked at Dean, he felt that the latter was like a devil in human clothes. This terrible calculation and coldness, as well as the extraordinary wisdom to forge terrible weapons, were by no means possessed by human beings. In the pair of calm eyes, there seemed to be a deep evil aura, overlooking everything. He couldn't help but feel regret in his heart. He shouldn't have exposed his ambition too early and offended such a monster. At this moment, looking at the ferocious giant beast that was 1,000 meters away and struggling with its whole body wrapped in chains, his heart felt cold and his limbs went cold. He stared blankly and was speechless. "Give me the bow." Dean's voice brought Nicotine back to reality. Nicotine's hair stood up as he heard Dudian's words. He instinctively reacted quickly as he looked around and found the bow and arrows that Dudian had brought. He went forward and picked them up. Dudian wanted the bow. He turned and trotted quickly, handing the bow and arrows to Dean. Dean grabbed the bow and arrow, but didn't look at him. His eyes were firmly locked on the Splitter. He saw the Splitter desperately struggle and finally cut off one of the chains. Its body regained some mobility and quickly ran away. However, its speed wasn't as fast as it came. Dean's eyes narrowed slightly. Holding the bow, he took a step forward and stood on the edge of the giant wall. Facing the cold wind, his clothes fluttered in the wind. Nicholas was scared as he saw Dean's bold move. The wind at the height of a kilometer was extremely fierce. A little bit of carelessness, and he would be swept down. Even a person with a high physique would find it difficult to resist. Dean wasn't nervous. Instead, he slowly opened his arms and held the bow in one hand as if to embrace the wind. He was indeed embracing the wind. His body slowly leaned forward, and then he suddenly leaped. Whoosh! Dean's body quickly fell down. Nicotine's heart almost jumped out of his throat. He couldn't help but scream. He didn't think that Dean would commit suicide. He rushed to the edge and stretched his head to look down. He saw that Dean's body had shifted to the front. The bow in his hand was relatively heavy. His jumping posture quickly changed to head down and feet up. Nicotine's mind went blank. A moment ago, he was afraid of Dean, but now he was committing suicide in such a way. He couldn't figure it out, but it was the truth. Dean, who was falling about 100 meters down, suddenly had a semicircular cloth appear under his armpits. His falling speed was greatly reduced, and he was gliding forward. If people from the old era saw this scene, they would be extremely familiar with it. This was the gliding equipment of extreme sports. But at the moment, Dean was using it to hunt monsters. Nicotine's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as he stared at the scene in front of him. A person was flying? Whoosh! Dean opened his arms. He was a little nervous. This was his first flight test. It was the first time he used it in actual combat. Moreover, he was facing a legendary monster that had reached level 68. He admired his courage. At this moment, his ears were filled with the whistling of the wind. His arms swayed slightly, adjusting the angle of his glide. After gliding for 200 to 300 meters, he grasped a bit of the wind and was able to control the angle of his glide a bit more. Looking at the wilderness and the great earth below him, all of the blood in his body sped up. This intense stimulation caused his hormones to soar and his blood to boil. After gliding to 500 meters above the ground, he tried to adjust the angle to follow behind the splitter. Although the gliding speed was extremely fast, the splitter's running speed was even faster. Previously, when he was on the giant wall, he didn't have a strong feeling. But the closer he got, the more he felt the amazing speed of the splitter. Moreover, it was injured. Boom! Boom! The splitter quickly ran forward. Along the way, the weeds were cut by the giant's sword. The distance between the splitter and Dean was quickly pulled apart. In the blink of an eye, the splitter had run to a place where Dean needed to look up to see it. By the time it reached a height of more than 200 meters, the splitter had run away and was about to disappear at the end of his line of sight. Dean didn't continue to look at the splitter. He touched the small backpack on his back. He had worn this backpack when he was climbing. At this moment, the backpack was pulled open and a fluffy cloth suddenly flew out. It was a parachute. This was the backpack that Dean had prepared for himself when he was climbing. In case he accidentally fell, it could save his life. After the parachute opened, Dean slowly descended to the ground. After landing, he rolled over and quickly untied the backpack. He held the bow in one hand and the quiver in the other. He quickly chased after the splitter. The real hunt had now begun. Chapter 331. Whoosh! Dean was nervous as he followed the trampled ground. After all, the splitter could smell his scent. It could turn around and kill him at any time. It would be absolutely difficult for him to escape on land. However, he had the courage to come down to track the splitter because of another consideration. For the splitter, he was just a small character. Moreover, the unknown enemy was in the direction of the giant wall, so the probability of it turning back was very low. Dean didn't need to worry about encountering other monsters as he chased after the splitter. After all, the movement caused by the splitter was too strong. As the hegemon of this generation, the monsters should have formed a fear reaction when they smelled the splitter's scent. Dean didn't encounter other monsters after chasing for more than 30 kilometers. He thought that the splitter had been in front of the giant wall several times. The monsters of this generation should have been treated as snacks by it. Dean gradually reduced his speed after chasing for more than 10 kilometers. He took out the undead powder and sprinkled it on his body. Although the splitter wasn't picky about the meat species, but the main purpose of the undead powder was not to cover his human scent, but to cover his own scent. He didn't want the splitter to detect that the smell on his body was the same as the one it smelled in front of the giant wall. Dean stealthily touched the ruins of a high-rise building. It was a 4-story residential building that had cracked and crumbled. The tiles on the wall had long fallen off and were covered with green hairy moss. He immediately smelled the smell of blood-sucking rats, the smell of decaying corpses, and the smell of decaying corpses. However, this smell of decay was different from the smell of decaying corpses. It belonged to the smell of decaying corpses that had died. The subtle difference could only be distinguished by experience. Dean quickly climbed to the top of the residential building. He stepped on the wall and almost lost his balance and fell down. Dean instinctively bent down and looked into the distance. He saw a figure more than 30 meters high. It was crawling in the middle of a ruined street. The surrounding buildings had long collapsed and were buried in vines and weeds. Splitter was lying on the ground, gasping for breath. Its body was tangled by the tungsten steel chains. Green liquid and blood kept seeping out from the places where the shark spears were pierced. Dean's eyes flashed. He didn't expect the Splitter to be so tenacious. Only he knew the real killer move of the tungsten steel shark spear. It wasn't its destructive power, but the large amount of venom inside the shark spear. Dean bought 3 different kinds of poisons from the temple during the days when he was making the turrets. They were the most poisonous drugs that had been researched by wood architects. He bought 100 pounds of each type of poison every day. In a few days, he bought more than 1,000 pounds of poison. If it weren't for the fact that the antidotes for these poisons had already been developed and that they weren't instant poisons, the sale of these poisons would have been banned in the temple long ago. Dean specially forged 6 shark spears that were loaded with poison. The tip of each shark spear was filled with mercury. Behind the mercury was a thin layer of metal. The body of the shark spear was filled with poison. The reason behind the shark spear was the same as his mercury arrows. They were made using the explosive method of the old era. When a shark spear pierced into Splitter's body, the highly dense mercury inside the spear's tip would instantly break through the spear's tip and pour into Splitter's body. Once the mercury broke through the hole, the poison inside the spear would also flow out and seep into Splitter's body. If the poison directly poured into some important body parts, it would have an unexpected effect. After all, these poisons were all top-notch poisons that he had never banned from selling. Some were in the form of powder, and some were in the form of liquid. No matter what kind of poison it was, a sesame-sized one would be able to poison an ordinary adult strongman. If the poison wasn't treated for a long time, it would certainly be fatal. If it was directly injected into the blood vessels, then even if it was a slow poison, it would instantly take a person's life. However, at the moment the Splitter was attacked by 3 shark spears. The shark spears had pierced into its body, but it still had some strength left. The tenacity of its vitality was really terrifying. Is it because the mercury didn't penetrate the spear tip and the venom didn't pour into its body? Dean couldn't help but doubt. He silently calculated the time when the 3 poisons would take effect. He wanted to use these poisons to exhaust the Splitter to death. If he couldn't exhaust the Splitter to death, then he would have to run away. As for hunting, unless the Splitter was on the verge of death and couldn't move. Otherwise, he would never take the risk of using his arrows to tickle the Splitter's carapace. The main purpose of bringing the bow and arrows was to guard against other monsters. Dean was a little glad that Splitter's body structure showed that it belonged to the extreme attack-type monster. All of its limbs were sharp blades, which caused its defense to be far inferior to other monsters of the same level. If it was like the guardian of the 8 legendary monsters, then he would have to give up. It was estimated that even if he made a tank or cannon, it would be difficult to hurt that monster. Time ticked by. The Splitter was lying on the ground to rest. It seemed that it was unwilling to move. Dean looked at it from afar. He wasn't sure if it was tired and resting or if it was exhausted by the venom. After waiting for a long time, he couldn't help but want to pull the bow and shoot to see its reaction. But in the end, he held back. If the Splitter was just resting, then his action would undoubtedly be courting death. He could only continue to wait and observe. This was a problem that most hunters would encounter during hunting, and he had to solve it. The time for the 3 poisons to take effect in the human body is 4 hours, 10 hours, and 18 hours respectively. Dean's eyes flashed slightly. Its physique is completely different from that of a human. Humans' poison time is completely useless. Father said that if we use mismatched data as a reference, the result will inevitably be a failure. I have to test it, but I can't use the bow and arrows. He thought for a moment and suddenly remembered that there was still a small cluster of Splitter's blood powder in his armor. His eyes suddenly lit up. He turned around and returned to the residential building. In the absence of electricity, the building was dark even in broad daylight. The windows were covered by thick vines and dust. Dean's eyes quickly swept over and quickly followed the smell. He found several active blood-sucking rats in a hole in the corner. Whoosh! He quickly jumped over and grabbed a blood-sucking rat. He pinched its neck so that it couldn't bite his wrist. After the blood-sucking rat was caught, its companions were scared and immediately shrank back into the hole. They ran straight to the next floor. Dean didn't pay attention to the other blood-sucking rats. He grabbed the squeaky rat and went back to the roof. He took out the rest of the blood powder and tied it to the neck of the rat. The blood powder was wrapped around the back of the rat's neck to prevent it from being torn off by its claws. The rat squeaked anxiously. It seemed that it was afraid of the smell of the undead on Dean's body. Dean pinched its body and threw it to the splitter in front of him. At the moment, he was 2 or 3 kilometers away from the splitter. The rat was thrown about 700 or 800 meters away and fell into the grass. Chapter 332. Squeak. The blood-devouring rat fell into the grass, which was denser than its surroundings. The blood-devouring rat rolled 7 or 8 times after falling into the grass, but it did not die on the spot. It grimaced in pain as it screamed and rolled its body, trying to get up. However, one of its legs was broken, and it could not stand firm even after trying several times. In the end, it could only crawl on the ground and slowly drag its body toward a patch of grass to the side. Dean shrank his body to the edge of the bungalow. He only revealed a pair of eyes as he stared at Splitter. He didn't care whether the rat was dead or alive. Whether it was dead or alive, Splitter wouldn't care about the ability of this little thing. The real test for Splitter was the blood powder on the back of the rat. There was only the sound of the breeze. Dean held his breath as time passed. In the blink of an eye, 7 or 8 seconds had passed. Splitter heard the sound of the rat falling into the bungalow. There was no movement after that. Dean's heartbeat gradually accelerated. He didn't see any movement from Splitter after 10 seconds. His heart was relieved. His eyes flashed with killing intent. He quickly opened the quiver on his back and pulled out an arrow. He jumped down the bungalow and jumped into the desolate street. Thick weeds grew in the cracks of the street to cover his body. I have to hit its flaws. Dean was approaching at full speed. This was the most dangerous moment. He would personally give the monster a final fatal blow. Moreover, he only had one chance to make a move. Dean was also observing Splitter when he secretly delivered food to the small Splitter. After all, it was a legendary monster. Whether it was the Temple of Elements or the forces of the Inner Wall, it was a precious opportunity to observe a legendary monster at such a close distance. Dean roughly understood the structure of Splitter's body and observed its 2 weaknesses. The first one was the eyeball. For most creatures, the eyeball was the weakest part. This was no exception for Splitter. However, the eyelid on the outside of its eyeball was a sturdy protective layer. It was one of the rare creatures that had evolved their eyelids into armor. Moreover, the thickness of the armor was 3 centimeters. Even an ordinary handgun bullet would only be able to leave a dent on the surface of the armor. Therefore, the only way to hit the eyeball was to grab the moment before the eyelid closed. The second weakness was its excretion. Out of all the limbs on its body, more than 80% were scythe-like arms, and the remaining 20% were the head and the torso. This was an extremely shocking ratio. Its torso was flat, and its surface was covered by a layer of hard carapace. The edges were extremely sharp, and if it were a human's body, even the waist would be as sharp as a blade and could be used to attack enemies. But the excretion at the tail was an unprotected place. Although the excretion was covered by the carapace, there was no other extra protection. As long as an arrow was shot into it, it could cause damage. Whoosh! Dean ran through the grass and circled behind the Splitter. Previously, he had used the blood powder as bait, but it didn't move. This made him feel a little relieved as he got close to the range. It didn't take long for Dean to reach the position of 150 meters away from Splitter. This was his effective range. His maximum effective range had already reached 300 meters. However, his destructive power was at its peak at 150 meters. Moreover, the accuracy was also the highest. Dean bent down in the grass, looking at the 30-meter-tall giant in front of him. If the latter counterattacked, he would die. He could not help but feel nervous. His whole body was tense, his muscles were tense, and he did not dare to breathe. Dean moved a few steps to the left and right to adjust the angle. From here, he could see that the tail of the splitter was hanging on the ground. There were messy, side-like arms on both sides of the torso. There were several attack angles from which he could shoot the tail of the splitter in a straight line. He picked the best angle and put an arrow on it. He didn't dare to reveal too much killing intent. He treated the splitter as a target for his training in the past. He restrained his murderous intent. Only one arrow. Dean narrowed his eyes. He slowly took a deep breath and locked his eyes on the excretion. Whoosh! The arrow flew away. Dean didn't foolishly stand in the same place to see the result. Instead, he turned around and ran. The distance of 150 meters was crossed in the blink of an eye. The arrowhead penetrated into Splitter's excretory orifice. Splitter was lying motionless on the ground. It growled as its huge body slowly moved. It turned its head and saw Dean rushing through the grass. It roared and chased after him. Dean's face changed. He didn't expect it to have such a powerful physical strength. He quickly shot an arrow at a tall building in the distance. There was a rope tied to the back of the arrow. He dragged the rope and swung to the back of the tall building. He turned around and continued to run. Bang! The body of Splitter crashed into the tall building. Dean didn't run in a straight line. He jumped into a gap not far away. It must be known that this place used to be a city. There were dark sewers and subways under the ground. Dean jumped straight into the gap. After the high-temperature radiation of the Black Death season, the water had long dried up. It was a subway station. Dean was not surprised. He had seen the roadside sign covered with moss and dust in the grass. Although the writing on it was blurred, there were still some traces left, so he recognized it. He looked up and saw a black steel dragon in the distance. It was the subway. Dean was not surprised to see the subway stop at the platform. He immediately ran towards it. Before he attacked Splitter, he had perceived the surrounding environment. The smell of decay was very strong. It was obvious that there was a subway stop at the platform. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a strong smell of decay. Bang! Dean went into the subway through the window. The subway was dark. There were 2 rows of seats with corpses lying on the ground. Most of them were bones covered with thick dust. The flesh and blood had long decayed over the years. There were also some dried corpses lying on the ground. Their skin was wrinkled. They looked like 80-years-old people. There were patches of brown spots on their skin. Their cheeks and clothes looked like those of young people in their 20s. Dean's eyes turned cold as he saw the corpses. He didn't go near them. He ignored them and ran straight to the subway. The corpses suddenly opened their eyes and reached out to grab Dean as Dean passed by. But Dean's speed was too fast, so they caught nothing. The next moment, all the corpses stood up one by one like evil spirits. Their wrinkled faces were incomparably ferocious as they growled and chased after Dean. Dean saw that these guys were alarmed. He sighed in his heart. Although he had smeared the undead powder, but he was too nervous when he was attacking Splitter. His sweat had caused his smell to overshadow the smell of the undead powder, so he couldn't fool them. The Monster Atlas says that the undead are afraid of fire and will follow the light. When it is dark, they will follow the sound. When it is silent, the undead will sleep. Dudian ran all the way and found that there were 7 or 8 undead sleeping in each subway carriage. Due to the lack of light and food for a long time, their skin was shriveled and they were seriously dehydrated. With the appearance of Dean, all the undead sleeping in the subway woke up and roared as they chased after Dean. Dean took out the undead powder and continued to smear it on his body. Rumble. Outside the subway, a loud noise could be heard. It was Splitter. Its huge body squeezed into the subway through the gap. Bang! Dean felt the subway under his feet slightly vibrate. He could not help but be aghast. He could only hear a harsh, creaking sound coming from behind. It was like nails scratching a metal plate. It was a sharp friction sound. Dean couldn't help but think that Splitter wouldn't cut off the subway, right? With the sharpness of the ladder's scythe arm, it wouldn't be difficult to cut off the subway. Dean didn't dare to stop and continue to run. Some of the revived undead roared and rushed towards Splitter after smelling the smell of Splitter. Some were still chasing behind Dean. These undead were fearless. Soon more than a dozen undead gathered in front of Splitter. They bared their fangs and brandished their claws at the behemoth. Splitter roared and waved its sharp blade to cut off the undead that were running towards it. However, some of the undead that weren't beheaded were still crawling toward Splitter. Splitter didn't pay attention to these little guys. It waved its scythe arm and cut the subway into several pieces. It roared twice, but didn't continue to move forward. It just crawled on the ground. A large number of undead ran out of the subway. They smelled the blood flowing out of Splitter's body. They were like sharks that smelled fish. They were excited and rushed toward Splitter. The two slender scythe arms on the back of Splitter gently moved and easily pushed away the undead that were rushing towards it. The body of the undead was cut into two pieces. Dean ran along the subway all the way to the other end of the cab. He kicked the door open and saw 3 corpses lying on the ground in the cab. They had accumulated a thick layer of dust. The flesh and blood had decayed and disappeared, leaving only black skeletons. There was a figure wearing a military cap sitting on the seat of the subway. Dean walked over to the driver's seat. The figure slowly turned the seat and looked back. It was a shriveled face. The other half of the face seemed to have been bitten off by something, exposing teeth and cheekbones. Dean didn't look at it. The dagger in his hand quickly pierced through its head before it got up and rushed towards him. He didn't have time to take the cold crystal from its head. He kicked open the front window of the driver's seat and jumped out of the subway. He ran to another platform and looked back. He was relieved to see that Splitter didn't chase after him. It's difficult to kill it even if I hit its weakness with my bow and arrow. Dean frowned as he thought about other hunting methods. Roar. At this time, the undead that were chasing after Dean rushed out from the broken front window. They didn't know how to jump, so their posture when they landed was much uglier. Almost all of them slid down the front of the subway. They climbed up after they landed and climbed towards the platform where Dean was standing. Dean lifted his foot and kicked. Bang! An undead with curly hair and fashionable clothes with a ferocious face was kicked by Dean. The front of the hunter's boots was made of alloy, which was extremely hard. With Dean's strength, the undead's throat was broken. The undead's chin was attached to Dean's shoes. Bang! Dean's toes slightly hooked, and the undead's head was dislocated from the cervical vertebra and flew out. Dean continued to kick the other 2 undead to death. He turned around and ran to the other side of the subway. He didn't want to continue to entangle with these undead. Dean frowned as he looked around at the desolate open space. He had used almost all the methods he could think of to hunt the monsters. The only thing he could use was the old method, which was to lure other monsters to attack the Splitter. However, Splitter was different from the usual monsters. Even if it was an injured monster, its level 68 hunting rank was far higher than any other monster in the area. Even the strongest monster in the area could be easily killed by Splitter. With his physique, he could only lure a level 20 monster at most. Even if a monster like that ran in front of Splitter, it would be scared and run away in a panic. No matter what, I can only try. Maybe I can lure a few bold ones. Dean thought about it and finally decided to use the old method. Whoosh! He turned around and ran in the direction of a scent that was more than 10 miles away from where his sense of smell had picked up. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of the smell. It was a black figure that was nearly 4 meters tall. Its whole body was covered with sharp hair. It looked like a giant wild boar. There were 6 or 7 curved, white tusks in front of its protruding mouth. Snow-toothed monster pig, level 24. Dean immediately recognized the information of this monster. This was one of the more popular monsters among the nobles. The tusks on its body were the favorite collection materials of the nobles. Many noble families had carvings of the snow-toothed monster pig's teeth. Its speed should be faster than me. I can only take the risk. Dean took a deep breath and shot an arrow from more than 600 meters away. The arrow fell halfway, but the movement was sensed by the snow-toothed pig. It saw Dean, who was 600 meters away, waving at it. A fierce look appeared in its eyes, and it roared as it rushed over. Dean immediately turned around and ran. Rumble. The snow-toothed monster pig was like a tank. The ground shook as it ran. When Dean looked back, he found that the speed of the two was rapidly closing. He couldn't help but jump in fright. He hurriedly turned around and ran. However, right when he was dashing with all his might, he suddenly heard a shrill and miserable cry from behind him, and it was followed by a loud bang. He couldn't help but turn around to look, and he saw that the snow-toothed devil pig had actually fallen to the ground. Its body rolled a few times, and it was groaning in pain as it couldn't get up. Dean was stunned. At this moment, he suddenly saw a purple shadow in the wilderness behind the snow-toothed monster pig. It looked like a human. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.